All right, good afternoon, everyone. The hour of 1 having arrived, let's call this meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. This is the 6th, believe it or not, time we've gotten together for the Governor's Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force. And before we start, as always, I want to go through the housekeeping rules. If we need to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will go off. Take your car keys and valuables and leave the building the same way you came in, out the doors at the back of the room, into the lobby, and left out of the building's main entrance. Go up the stairs and continue to the top of the parking lot. Our assembly area is in the left half of the top row. Karen Yorty of my staff will lead you there. If you need assistance or are unable to go up the steps, remain in the room until others have left, and Heather Ream of my staff will either help you to the side parking lot or inform safety personnel where you are and return to wait with you. Please don't operate cellular telephones or any other electronic device in the event of an emergency, and follow any instructions given by building safety personnel who will be wearing orange ball caps marked safety. Remain at the assembly area until the building safety personnel give the all clear. Please don't leave. The entrance to the parking lot needs to be kept clear for incoming emergency vehicles. Turning now to your personal comfort, the restrooms are located off the lobby. Go out the back conference room door, the one we all came in, and turn to your right. The ladies' room is on the left, and the men's room is on the right. A water fountain is past the restrooms on the other side of the security doors, and a DEP staffer will be in the lobby and can let you in and out through the security doors. We will have a short break on the agenda, as we'll go through in a second, but please don't feel constrained. With that, I want to turn to the agenda of today's meeting. I will have a brief slide deck, which I sent out, we had sent out last night to folks. We'll be talking today about the draft report. There will be a public comment period at the conclusion of that conversation. And then we are going to talk in a couple of minutes about the final meeting, currently scheduled for January 13th. And we want to talk with you about the possibility or the need to perhaps move that back 1 week. But there are several things that I want to just turn to right away. I am remiss here, we have to introduce ourselves. So let's go around the room and tell us who's here.
Sarah Battisti, Southwestern Energy.
Kurt Beyondich, TRC.
Gladys Brown, Public Utility Commission.
Dave Callahan, Mark West.
Bill Seib, Corps of Engineers, representing Colonel Chamberlain.
Keith Coyle, Van Ness Feldman.
Kathy Kazan, Chester County Commissioner.
Denise Brinley, Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, representing Secretary Dennis Davin.
Dan Devlin, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources.
Michael DiMatteo, Pennsylvania Game Commission.
Alan Brunzer, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency.
Anthony Gallagher, Steve Frizz, Local 420.
Wayne Gardner, W.E. Gardner Company.
Mike Gross, Post and Shell.
Sam Robinson, Governor's Policy Office, representing Secretary John Hanger.
Mike Helbing, Penn Future.
Tom Hutchins with Kinder Morgan.
Don Keel, CETA Council of Governments.
Bill Kiger, PA 811.
Ken Klimo, Wilkes University.
Joe McGinn, Sunoco Logistics.
Doug McLaren, Historical and Museum Commission.
Marvin Mateer, Wyoming Township, Bradford County.
Lauren Parker, Civil and Environmental Consultants.
Dwayne Peters, ACEC.
Mark Reeves with Shell.
Emma Lowe, PennDOT, representing Secretary Leslie Richards.
David Smith, PA Turnpike Commission.
Michael Smith, Department of Agriculture. Steve Tambini, Delaware River Basin Commission.
Justin Treadle, Rice Energy.
Great, thank you very much. Just a reminder to folks when we get into the conversation, if you will make sure that you say your name with spelling, at least on the first go-around for our stenographer, try to make her life a little bit easier. I want to turn to the next slide on the deck, please, Greg. Just talk about where we are. First thing that you will be interested in knowing is that we have extended the public comment period by 15 days. It was originally set at 30 days, but we've extended it to a total of 45. The public comment period on the draft report will close on December 29th. We will provide to the members of the task force a copy or a compilation of those public comments on January 4th. We have developed a reputation for quick turnaround, and Karen will work her magic again, and we will have in your hands on January 4th a compilation of all public comments. At the last meeting, we talked about the results of the first survey, which I think indicated some substantial consensus, but a pretty pervasive wish to talk about some of the details to the point of, in the last meeting, some wordsmithing. So to try to clarify the charge here, we have sent out to members of the task force a draft preamble, which we welcome your comments on. And again, I want to emphasize the main points of that preamble is that in this document, in this report to the governor, we're not asking task force members to endorse every word. The report is going to compile the recommendations, 184, for further consideration by the appropriate agency or entity. That each recommendation at that point, after this task force process is over, has to be evaluated and assessed for possible implementation. And that's where some of the questions about overlap or conflict with various regulatory regimes and so forth, that's where those questions are going to be answered. So the long and the short of it is that the report is not the final word, but the beginning of a longer dialogue. And just to give you an example of how we envision this process working after the report is delivered to the governor, DEP has its own internal pipeline working group that has done a tremendous amount of work already over the course of even the last year or so. And we're already taking a look at some of the specific recommendations that have come out in the draft report. And I'll give you one example, things like e-permitting. E-permitting is a goal of DEP. That was a goal coming in the door last January. So there are many things that I think will be readily actionable certainly by DEP and hopefully by some other agencies going forward. But that follow-on work is where the details and some of the nuances really are going to be worked out. But again, relative to the preamble, I would ask that if you have any comments on that draft preamble to email them to Karen Yorty of my staff, hopefully before January 4th. But we would like to be able to present a final draft for consideration at the next task force meeting. Again, turning to the surveys, again, the first survey, the first poll that we put out for the task force, I think showed some substantial consensus. We identified, and we'll talk a little bit in a couple of minutes about areas of overlap. And I use the word overlap because there really isn't duplication when you look at some of these reports. There are a lot of things that look alike, but there are nuances and differences, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of work has to be done subsequent to the task force. And let me flip to the next slide and talk a little bit about the overlap question. As you know, if you've spent any time with the 184 recommendations, you know that there is a substantial amount of overlap. And depending on how you slice and dice, and you can do it in a number of ways, and there isn't a precise mathematical formula. Just looking at it one way, there's at least 23 areas, subject areas, where the recommendations overlap. And the first slide presents the first half of those in terms of things like community engagement and communication. 19 recommendations touched or dealt with some aspect of that issue. And you can walk down the list: monitoring and maintenance, landscape level planning, reduced forest fragmentation, all have double-digit overlap in terms of the recommendations. But frankly, I don't think it's productive and not necessarily respectful of the work groups to try to mash everything together. And I think that's really illustrates the importance of the follow-on work that we envisioned at the outset of this process and that we're contemplating going forward, that the details will be worked out in terms of evaluation and implementation subsequent to the finalization of the report. Turning to the next slide again, you can see other areas of significant overlap. All good thinking by multiple work groups. But again, this is where the differences and the nuances really have to be teased out in a process that will go on after this task force is done. In fact, if this task force will be a success if we ignite that conversation about how to turn these recommendations in whatever in whatever form after an evaluation into reality. That will be the ultimate success of this task force, and I want to get to how we might arrive at some of that here in a second. Turning to the next slide, I want to talk about the last survey that we put out that was requested by the members of the task force at the last meeting. 27 out of the 47 of us actually participated in that survey. So I got to tell you that I don't know that those results are necessarily representative of the group. We have barely a majority of the group participating in the last survey, so I would caution you that those results, which I will talk about in a second, are not necessarily reflective of the group, and that's why I want to propose a process in a couple of minutes. We had 22 of the 27 folks who took the survey actually submitted comments, and I still think that there is substantial consensus. There were 2 recommendations where there was some disagreement in conservation and natural resources, mitigate the loss to public lands. 40.74% of the 27 agreed, 44% disagreed, about 15% were neutral. Local government recommendation number 3, clarify and examine the need for local regulation of surface facilities. 38% agreed, almost 54% disagreed, about 8% were neutral. Again, not necessarily reflective of the group because it was a subset of the task force that actually completed the survey. In that survey, there were 3 ties. On conservation side, public access to pipeline GIS information, a tie. Conservation number 3, use a landscape approach to siting corridors, a tie. And again, amending the MPC under county government to empower county conservation plans, a tie. So how we go forward, I want to turn to the next slide. Again, recall our charge that the governor asked us to recommend a series of best practices from planning to public participation to predictable and efficient permitting, construction, and then long-term operation and maintenance. Our charge was to recommend a series of best practices. So given the massive information that we have and the time that we have remaining in this task force to deliver a report to the governor in February, I want to turn to the next slide and talk about how we think, what we think is the fairest way to go forward. Given the data that we have from the surveys on the level of consensus, but recognizing individual task force members' concerns about giving the appearance, frankly, of endorsing individual recommendations that we all agree require more evaluation in the subsequent implementation phase, and just the number of very substantive comments. If you looked at the results of the survey, we got a lot of comments that were very substantive and very important. I think the fairest and the most transparent way to go forward is to borrow from a procedure that DEP has used successfully with other advisory committees where there is a diversity of opinion among members of the committee. And that is the voting model that our Climate Change Advisory Committee has used with success. And it goes like this. The task force members would vote on each recommendation. We'll have an online vote after the close of the public comment period and the transmission of its results for all of us to review, so that we would take a vote. And the choices are yes, no, and abstain. All of the work group recommendations would be included in the final report, and we would indicate for each recommendation the vote totals, indicating the level of support for the recommendation. The voting record of the task force would be included in an appendix, as well as a comment appendix, where task force members can include a statement explaining your vote on any or all recommendations. We'll include that in the document in an additional appendix. And we would propose to do that by asking all of you to send any comments that you would have in a Word document to Karen. We would open the voting on January 5th, again after the close of the public comment period and transmission of the compilation of comments. And then to facilitate and hopefully not reinvent the wheel from comments that you've already submitted, we will send to all of you a copy of the comments you submitted in the last survey, so you don't have to do things over again. So that is the procedure that we want to follow going forward. Let me turn to the next slide. We can have a little bit of conversation about that. Again, I think it's important that all of the recommendations that were developed by the work groups be included in the body of the report with the vote recorded. I do think the preamble will make clear that all of them require further evaluation in a follow-on phase. So that's how we want to honor the work that has been done by the 12 work groups. But there needs to be kind of a top-line summary or top-line conversation or top-line recommendations that we provide to the governor's office. Handing him a 6 or 7 inch thick document won't necessarily be helpful unless we put some cover on it. So I would suggest that the votes are the way to do that. And what I would like to talk with you about in this first section of the meeting today is an executive summary where we list the top X number of recommendations based on the number of yes votes that they received. I think that's the fairest and the most democratic way to do this. Again, noting that folks have a lot of input and comments and perhaps reservations about appearances. So we want to make sure that the record reflects all of the input that the task force members have in the document. But in terms of moving the process forward, I think the most expeditious and transparent and fairest way to do that is with this voting procedure and then deciding on an executive summary about the top X number of recommendations, whether it's the top 10, again, based on number of yes votes. So we need every member of the task force to vote on this one. Nobody can sit it out. It's yes, no, or abstain. So that's the process that we would like to move going forward. And before we turn to the schedule, let me just stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Again, please say your name first, Kathy. And
Kathy Kazone. My question is just relating to identifying the top recommendations, and I think it's a Herculean task. So, but I think, you know, there are, in the report of those that overlapped, for example, the first one had 19 instances of overlap. So I don't know how or if there's a way to include the sort of instances of overlap when you're kind of coming to that conclusion. You know, if you have 19 recommendations that all speak to that topic and, you know, one ends up in the top 10 and, you know, 18 of them end up in the, you know, in the middle or the bottom, I don't know if that addresses the sort of full, the work of the work groups relative to that particular topic. So I mean, I don't know how you would do that, but it was just something that occurred to me when I saw that there were 19 recommendations that fell into that category.
right. Well, I would say, Kathy, I don't know how to do it either. I'm open to suggestion. But again, to make sure that we are transparent in this work, again, and trying to be as fair as possible, this seems to be the simplest way to do it. And I am very hesitant to try to combine recommendations. We have sent out to everybody a grouping of the overlaps, if that helps. So I'm open to suggestion, but I can't think of a fair way to do it at this point.
Well, maybe in just the summary or the discussion, that chart, a chart similar to that could be included so that there's some sense of the reader, whether it's the governor or anybody else, that, you know, in addition to whatever these top 10 or top whatever, you know, there was substantial overlap in a number of other areas.
We will definitely include that chart in the final report to identify the areas of overlap. And again, I would encourage everybody to take a look at that. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder on that one. You can move stuff around and into different buckets. So we took at least the first cut at that, open to comments and suggestions about whether or not we need to move a few things around here.
So Ken Klimo from Wilk. So again, I just want to second the idea that I guess I wish that that there would have been some effort to consolidate some of the overlap there. Certainly, some of the recommendations that we made in environmental protection were very similar to those that were made in natural resources. And again, it would seem that one of the strategies would be at some point to get some of the folks from natural resources and some of the people from environmental protection and anybody else, you know, to look at specific recommendations that do overlap quite a bit. And there's almost, and I would have to say in some cases there is duplication. And so I don't know whether that can be done, you know, before January or after January, or if this is part of the ongoing process. I mean, certainly, this would be something that probably I'd be interested in helping to work with. And so, again, we do need to somehow consolidate, you know, the recommendations. The second question I have is to what degree the public comment is going to be provided as part of the, you know, the recommendations that we see with regard to voting. Is it likely that public comment might actually give us some ideas for changing some of the recommendations? And so, or is that something, again, that would happen after the completion of the task force?
No, we will provide to the members of the task force a compilation of all public comments on January 4th, the day before the voting opens. So you'll have a chance to read through that and do with it what you will. But you'll have a compilation of all public comments on January 4th. Wayne.
Wayne Gardner. Have you given any thought yet to how long the voting period will be open?
Yes, actually we have. And that, I believe, is on the slide that we haven't come to yet. But we can jump to that in a second, or we can do that right now. And I know there's some other questions, but just to answer yours directly, we would look to close the vote at noon on January 15. That's if we decide to move a meeting. If we stay on our current schedule, the voting would close at noon on January 8th. So, but I want to kind of talk through some of the nuances of that. So we have a couple of dates by which the voting would close. It depends on a subsequent question that we're going to ask here this morning about the last meeting. So we'll come back to that, Wayne, if that's okay. Steve.
Yes, Steve Tambini. From an executive summary standpoint, just following up on prior comments, I think perhaps you can consider two data sets. One being the task force and the votes. Clearly, it's fair to list the votes and provide all that data, and whichever rise to the top, reflect those. But similar to what you did on the overlap issue, you can consider the input from the work group as another data set and reflect the top themes, similar to what was provided on the overlap issue. You're right, you could move that around a little bit, but the themes are there. And that is a data set that came out of this process from the work groups. I recognize that a lot of those task force members were on the work groups, but that data set can be reflected in the executive summary as this is what came in from the work groups. These are the top themes without editorializing too much. It's just data, like you did on the board there, and then take it to the next step, which is this is what the task force voted on, and these are the top votes. So I think you could do both and still reflect that overlap without, still reflecting really, truly what happened during the process.
Right. And we will, again, with the data we've sent out on the overlap, we'll do our best to present that in an intelligent way so that it's intuitively obvious. But good point. Dan?
John, I just want to echo that as well. I mean, if you look at your data that you presented to us, the landscape approach was number 3 in terms of overlap. So obviously significant interest in that. But if you look at the vote tally, the landscape approach is dead even. So the question is, which one is more significant than the other? And I don't have an answer either, but it seems to me that there's a little bit of yin and a yang going on there as well.
Right. And there's a balance that we've got to strike here. And that's really what we want to spend the bulk of the conversation on here this afternoon, is trying to tease through some of that.
Mike Gross. Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure that I completely understand the logic of including certain recommendations where a majority of the task force has voted to disagree with those recommendations. Maybe there's some, I want to honor what's been done by the work groups. Obviously, I participated on one, put a lot of time and effort into it, but I think more than just noting a vote total, there has to be something to acknowledge that the majority of the task force has disagreed with a particular recommendation. And if not all members of the task force participated in the survey or do so going forward, I'm sorry, I've spent so much time completing this survey, and with all due respect, if you don't participate and don't vote, you don't have a say.
Well, I agree with you, Mike, and it kind of begs the question, why did you volunteer in the first place? So we do need every member of the task force to vote, and make sure that their voice is heard on this process. I think if we reach a point, and I'm not necessarily convinced that we will, based on the data that I have in front of me, that a majority of the members of the task force would disagree on any of the recommendations, that we would probably put areas of disagreement or outright, you lost the election in a separate section. But I do want to honor the work of the work groups and not just cast it aside. I think it's fair to say that if that eventuates, we can say with complete transparency that the following recommendations were developed by the work group but not approved by the task force, and list them. Tom.
Tom Hutchins, I think to get specific on that, a lot of recommendations around mapping, some really good ones, and in probably one of the work groups' mind, the one that was the recommendation that each county would develop their own GIS system. I will be shocked if that's not one that doesn't get a lot of disagreement. And so to me, that's an example of one that should be noted in the report, and really mapping will have something that we'll move upon, but probably not that specific recommendation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and again, that's why this is obviously complicated stuff. And there's multiple levels of nuance that have to be worked through. When you talk about mapping, there's an obvious need for better mapping. There are obvious security concerns. There are company proprietary concerns that we've heard about. And all that has to be worked through, and it's not something that it's fair to task this group with doing. So that's why the way we envision this is that the appropriate agency is going to have a lot of work to do. DEP will have a lot of work to do at the conclusion of this process. And we will hand the document to our internal work group, and we'll start knocking things off and working things through. So it is not a necessarily crisp process, but this isn't a crisp issue. There's a lot of complications to this. So I agree with you, Tom. Sarah.
Sarah Battisti. If we get to the point of the January 20th or whenever we have our last meeting and we still have 27 out of 48 respondents and the other half have not responded, how will we deal with that? And if we do have everyone respond and these numbers change, we'll obviously talk about that at the next meeting, but can you talk about what you envision if that's the case and we do have a different fluctuation of numbers and percentages?
Well, we're going to respond to the data that we have. Again, I am asking, pleading with folks to vote. Again, it's yes, no, or abstain. We have to see what that vote, where that vote comes out. What I see from the first two rounds of surveys is that we actually do have substantial consensus with an appropriate level of caveat. And that's why we want to have the comment section from the members of the task force. We'll review the results of the voting at the last meeting, and we'll kind of cross that bridge when we come to it, Sarah. Again, we want to do this in a completely transparent and fair way, and we haven't had complete sets of data from the full task force, which is why everybody needs to weigh in at this point. So that's as good as I can get at the moment. Gonna put my glasses back on. Any other questions about the voting process? All right, let me switch gears and talk schedule. Then I want to come back to this idea of an executive summary, and then we'll turn to substantive conversation about all of the data that we filled your inbox with. If you look at the schedule slide, right now our last meeting is currently scheduled for January 13th. If we stick to that date, the voting would close on January 8th. So you would have January 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th to vote. There'd be a lot of late-night sessions, kind of like college, if that's the case. So the question is, would the task force like to have an extra week to consider the public comments before voting? Now, if we do that, the final meeting date would be moved to January 20th. We'd actually do it here, not at the venue that we were originally contemplating. If we move the meeting to January 20th, the voting would close at noon on January 15th. And then at that final meeting, we'd review the voting results, finalize the preamble, talk about the executive summary, which we're going to take up next, sign the signature page, and I'll just say on the signature page, we are going to need the governor's appointees to sign. We love the alternates. In most cases, they've done the work, but we need the appointees of the gubernatorial appointees to sign the signature page. And of course, as always, we'll have a final public comment period. So if the date changes that would make a difference in your actions and allow you additional time to study the public comments, is that some, and if it would increase your likelihood of voting. We need you to vote, folks. Is an additional week, would an additional week be helpful? So the presenting question is, do we want to move the meeting from January 8th to January 20th, or January 13th to January 20th? Tom?
Tom Hutchins, I would advocate for the 20th, so that's my recommendation. A question, though, will the survey still be using SurveyMonkey? Is that the plan?
Yeah, but it's going to be a very stripped down, we're going to try to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah, one of the, I guess, problems is that you couldn't stop part of the way through. You had to do it all in one sitting, which really made you find 2 or 3 hours of time to be able to do that. So if there was a way to change that, that would be extremely helpful. So you could do a third of it and then save that response and then come back and finish it.
Well, I get the problem with SurveyMonkey. It's not a perfect instrument. I'm willing to look at some other alternatives. We could send out a spreadsheet, and then we would have to copy and paste, one whole line from that big honking spreadsheet into another one. We could do it that way. If that would help folks, we'll do it the more difficult way. And we'll do the copy and paste, and you won't have to worry about it. Dan?
John, maybe everyone's calendar isn't like mine, but, I cannot make the January 20th. I already have the other one blocked off, so, I like the idea of having an extra week, but I don't know how everyone else's, in terms of their calendars look, so that's my quandary.
Yeah,
so.
no, we had this date kind of carved in stone, but I wanted to raise the question, just in fairness to everybody. Laura? Laura, your name for the stenographer, please.
Lauren Parker. Whenever we vote next time, are we putting comments in, or our comments are just going to be written and sent to Karen?
Comments will be in a Word document sent to
Okay.
Karen. It'll
So
be,
when
I
we
hope, a
vote-
lot easier.
When we vote, it's literally just yes, no, abstain
Correct.
the whole way through?
Correct.
Okay.
Questions? Wanted to show of hands, is there interest in moving the date, or are your calendars as tough as Dan's and probably mine? How about all those in favor of moving the date from January 13th to January 20th? Please raise your hands. Okay, we're going to do a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 27? I got 27, so majority rules. We're going to move the date to January 20th. Then, in that case, the meeting will be here and not at the venue that we originally talked about. And that means the voting will close at noon on January 15th. So, and I would also just note that Julie Lalla just handed me a note to remind me that there's no reason to wait until January 5th to start looking at public comments. They're available now on our e-comment webpage. And it's really easy because I can even do it. You can go on and look through the public comments, even starting now, if that helps you get ahead of the holiday crush. We will have a document for you within 5 days of the close of the public comment period. But you can go online now at any time and review the comments that we have received to date. All right, so we made a decision to move the meeting to January 20th. Sorry, Dan, and to others that messes up calendars. I feel your pain. Let me come back to the idea of an executive summary. Do we have somebody?
Yes.
Wayne, go ahead.
For those of us who won't be able to attend the January 20th meeting, how do you get our signatures on the document?
We'll figure it out. I don't have an answer for you at the moment, Wayne, but we'll make sure we find some way to do that. All right, let me talk a little bit about the executive summary concept. Again, we were asked to see if we can provide at the outset a cover, or at the submission of the document, some kind of a cover. Does a top 10 kind of a concept, again, by number of votes, make sense? Or other suggestions, top 15, top 20, but something that can provide some indication of what some of the basic recommendations are. Any suggestions? Dan?
I'm not sure, this is Dan Devlin again, I'm not sure that it, we could sit on a number right now. I mean, it seems to me that there should be some sort of natural break there that, there may be 10 that get the same number of votes. So you may want to see where that break is, so to speak, in terms of the voting thing.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my recommendation. And I don't know where that'll fall out. It may be at 10, it may be at 20, it may be at 17, it may be 23, I don't really know, but.
Okay. Well, then that may be something we talk about at the last meeting. But does the concept of this executive summary or something like it, does this make sense to folks? Anybody that disagrees violently? Or even semi-violently? Okay, all right, then we will bake that into the agenda for the last meeting. For the remainder of the time, if you look back at the agenda for today, the rest of the meeting really is going to be devoted to two things. Any conversation or discussion that you would like to have about the data that we've already presented, for example, the areas of overlap. And then, of course, we'll end the meeting with public comment. So at great personal risk, I'm going to open the floor. The floor is yours. What do you want to talk about? Kathy.
If I could just go back to Kathy Kuzan, the earlier conversation, to just clarify something, because I had a similar question as Ken. If there's something in the public comments that the work group might want to say, oh, we should have put that in our recommendation, or we should have considered it, I would imagine there's really not an opportunity for us to change our recommendation. But would there be a way for us to say, yeah, we'd like to make that part of a recommendation, or the voting will have been done and sort of can't really change it after the fact?
Well, the voting will have been done, but again, I think and it might be worth some conversation about this whole idea of the follow-on process. I think when it comes to this report, you can't get it right and you can't get it done. This is an evolving kind of a process. This really starts a much more detailed conversation and a multi-agency block of work. And I think for folks that have an interest in continuing the work as volunteers, I will say for DEP, as we work through all of the stuff that is assigned to us, we would love to reach out to others to help us tease through that. So, Ken and you, Kathy, if there are things that will eventually fall into DEP's lap that you want to continue to stay engaged on, we welcome that. So I would make that offer to anybody, and folks, even on the work groups, will try to figure out a way, again, that is as painless as possible that if folks want to continue to stay engaged on this at some level as volunteers, we'll try to make that happen. You're in? Okay, thank you. What else we want to talk about? I want to make sure that we give enough airtime to folks to, Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary, is this I'm trying to follow your rules, so I'm.
We're making
there
them
was
up
an
as we
issue
go, Glass.
There was an issue I wanted to discuss last time, and I know the format that you used, I didn't have that opportunity. So I just want to make sure that this is the proper time to discuss it. And it's one particular issue that actually was recommended by 2 of the work groups, so there is an overlap.
Please.
And the PUC does have a strong concern about the recommendation. So it was end user recommendation number 4, as well as economic development recommendation number 4. And they both deal with the use or the expansion of the current distribution system improvement charge. And I think under end user number 4, they would like to modify it to permit the utility to use that for new service, and the same thing for the economic development. And my concern as a member of the commission, I think the other commissioners have similar concerns as well, is that the DISC program has been working well for us. I even know, going back into my legislative experience, that the DISC has worked well for the acceleration of the replacement of the aging infrastructure. And it has worked well in terms of putting that charge on the bill for the utility customers, because we know that the infrastructure has to be replaced and in service before that charge goes on the bill. Because of that, because it has been working since 1996 with the water industry, and then was expanded in 2012 under Act 11 to natural gas as well as electric, and it has been working so well because we have so many concerns, especially in the natural gas industry. We were opposed to the expansion of it for new service. We're not opposed to some other type of charge. We're just opposed to the expansion of the current DISC because that was never the intent, and we're concerned that it would move away from what the original intent is. So I wanted to express that for the record.
Okay. And I think this is a great example, Madam Chair, about the importance of the task force members' comments in this appendix that we are going to have. You know, making that plain for the record as part of the final report is very important.
And we actually did that in the written comments, but I just felt strongly enough that I wanted to do that here again today.
And certainly want to give folks a chance to react. Denise.
Denise Brinley, DCD. I'm going to look at David Sweet as I say this because he was the very highly competent chair of our work group, and when we put that recommendation together, I believe that we had a lot of dialogue ourselves within our work group and fully anticipated that that would be vetted through this process of actually discussing recommendations and tweaking language. So I just want to put that out there, that I'm perplexed about this process and why, as a work group member, we would leave something on the table that wasn't right. So, and we acknowledged that going into it, even engaging with PUC a little bit to get a better handle on it. We didn't feel it was perfect going in.
Sarah Battisti. Sorry, you want to go ahead? No, she talked to you first. If you want to talk, go ahead. Sorry.
All I was going to add to Denise's very nice comment is, as I understand what you're saying, Madam Chairperson, the PUC is not necessarily opposed to another program
Correct.
that was conceptually parallel or akin to the DISC, but you just don't want the DISC, which has been successful, to perhaps be cluttered with something that is of a bit different intent.
Correct. We don't want the current intent is to replace the aging infrastructure.
Right.
We don't want the use of it for new service to take over and forget what the original purpose was, because we do have safety concerns, and that is the original
Right.
purpose of the DISC.
But the commission isn't at least at this juncture, saying that the whole concept of exploring a structure like DISC is
Correct.
is
We are not,
improper.
we
or
are not
anything.
saying that.
Okay, thanks a
We're just
lot.
going along with the language that's in here, and it talks about the expansion of the DISC
Right.
program. So-
And I think, quite frankly, our thinking, and Denise or others on the work group can correct me, or Sarah, certainly with your work group. I mean, I think our thinking was, this was a model that worked, and that most of us who've been in government have found that using an existing model is generally more acceptable than creating a new one. And so we were really just plagiarizing the current legislation and the current model. And it's the model I think we're interested in more so than perhaps, being incorporated in that exact provision.
And that's good to know. And let me just also give you some history, because I was a legislative staff person
Right.
all those years and worked on this legislation. The idea of having new service was already discussed in the Act 11 when we talked about the DISC program. And the same concerns were expressed there, that if we're talking about the replacement of the aging infrastructure, that's not the proper place for this. So, just to give you that background.
Sarah Battisti, I'll echo both comments. This was designed to have a conversation to say, okay, we know DISC works. Let's find a similar, or can we either expand it? Can we copy it? Can we plagiarize it? Can we find a system, knowing the expertise of the PUC, and obviously some of us who were around for Act 11 as well, and your background and the rest of the PUC commissioners, trying to find a way to build out infrastructure in a smart, not reinventing the wheel way.
Senator?
I think it's important you phrase it in a general way, because that very question is part, at least was at one point in the suggestions in the fiscal code that was being discussed with the governor's office. Because the issue of getting the gas to people is something that all sides of the aisle agree on. That it has to get to Pennsylvanians and not just be used for export. So you have to have an infrastructure to do it. You have to have a way to do that. And so there are a number of us on all sides of the island with different perspectives on Marcellus Shale who are united in that purpose. So it's putting it in a general way. How do you build out? What is the funding to build out is something that is on our plate right now.
Dwayne Peters. It sounds like we're getting to a point where, and I know we discussed that words don't matter at this phase, and I think we can all agree upon that to get all the recommendations perfect is going to be impossible with the time we have allotted. But as this thing goes to final, this report has generated a lot of interest from a lot of people, which is wonderful for a task force to have that kind of input. But one of our other functions, I think, is to educate the public on what we're doing, what the challenges are. So if there is time, and if there's a way to do it, and I'm not sure what the right way to do it, is taking the recommendations and breaking down the existing regulatory framework in place, some case history, things that basically affect the implementation of that. So people, whether it be people around the table, general citizens, interest groups, NGOs, can really understand if this is something that they want to go forward with, what really the framework is to obtaining that goal. So if it could be something along the lines that for a regulatory body to have additional authorities, how that additional authority could be given, where something isn't permissible under the existing law, or even if a recommendation is granted, where existing regulations can cover that recommendation. I think that would be really good towards extending the conversation and taking the conversation in Pennsylvania about pipelines to a different level.
Well, I agree with you, Dwayne, and I think my thought on that is that is, given the time that we have, certainly not something that this task force is going to have the bandwidth to do. But that's why the follow-on work is going to be so important. And again, I'll pick on my own agency as the example. When we look at the probably 80 or so at least 80, maybe even more, recommendations that will fall into DEP's lap at the conclusion of this thing. We're going to have to go through that exact process. And the way we work is very public, between our advisory committees and public comment periods. We're going to have to provide precisely that kind of context if there is a specific action that we intend to take on one of these recommendations. That's the way we have to do our job. Other agencies, I think other agencies, state government, it's pretty much the same model. Where, for example, the responsibility falls to counties, again, public bodies. Most of the recommendations here, I think, fall to a greater or lesser extent into the hands of some type of public agency. So again, that's why I think this task force is so representative of the fact that it's the start of a longer conversation. We have to take this report back, all of us, to our respective offices, and then take it to the next step after this process concludes. This is the start of a conversation.
Sorry, I'm having problems today. Dwayne Peters again. Just to follow that up, I know we talked about doing status reports. Maybe this is a way to incorporate that into status reports, that people understand the progress and the hard work that we're doing, and just to ensure that the follow-through is there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
Tom Hutchins. So in the prior meeting, we did do some name changes, and since we are going to be voting on these and everybody isn't here, would the work groups be open to changing the recommendation to say, instead of expanding the existing system, to evaluate the creation of a system similar to? I mean, because that sounds like that would address Gladys's concerns, and I think they're legitimate concerns, and it could get the vote a little bit higher on those initiatives.
What's the will of the group? I mean, we've made some surgical changes at the last meeting. We can certainly provide some clarification to this recommendation that Chairman Brown put together. We can do that here. I mean, that's the purpose of today's meeting.
Yes, Don Keel. If we decided not to do that, at least we have the ability to put that in comments. And I think you'd probably see that from multiple places to address that, so at least we'd be able to capture it like that.
So it can be done in a couple of ways. We can actually amend that here or add a clarifying sentence at this point, or we can reflect it in the comments from task force members.
Mr. Secretary, Dave Sweet again. I mean, we would consider it, I believe, a friendly amendment. And it could be, since the correction is pretty simple, that we're mirroring the DISC program, we're not expanding it. I would suggest that that kind of an edit just be adopted so that people can actually just read the recommendation and not have to dig through a comment as well.
So
there may be others that won't be that simple.
Right.
That you'll have to do something else.
Well, if we can just change the word expand to mirror, that might get us over the goal line. And I'm going to ask Gladys to, since you have it in front of you.
Put my legal hat on.
Not to put you on the spot.
So there's the end user one, which refers to modifying the statute to permit. So it's just as easy as putting the word mirror. You could say, pass legislation to permit the use of a charge similar to the DISC for new service. And I'm just throwing that out there generally. And the same thing could be for the economic development, because in that one, they say modify the statute to permit. Once again, it's just, enact legislation to permit the use of a charge for new service similar to a DISC.
I personally think that's fine.
Sarah? Anybody have any concerns about that if we make that change to those two? Okay, we will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other issues like that or anything else that the task force members want to kick around today? I mean, this is why we left today's agenda open-ended.
Here we go. Christina George Schwartz. So as far as the, the spreadsheet where it highlighted the overlap and also assigned a recommended lead agency, will we have an opportunity to provide comment on who we think should be the lead agency, or maybe there could be multiple agencies that can work together?
Sure. Do you have some, for instances?
Well, I guess the one, any of the overlap with regards to a permit coordinator, it looks like they've all been assigned to the DEP, but obviously some other agencies should be involved in that, in that consideration.
Well, I will say that within DEP, we have essentially a permit coordinator for each project.
Right,
So-
but it's usually multi-agency with a large project, and I was on the end-use work group. So, you know, you're dealing with PennDOT, DCNR. I mean, it's multi-agency permitting that really occurs on a large project, not just within DEP.
Right. And the way that we handle that is that we have regular consultations with all of the other permitting agencies. Just jurisdictions being what they are, I don't know that you could have a designated coordinator over multiple agencies. So the way we've worked around that is to have regularly scheduled calls with the other agencies and all get around the table and work on a particular project. So some of it is just the function of having, again, maybe the bane of the existence of the industry, multiple jurisdictions involved. You can't have a person in charge of state and federal agencies. But I get the concept.
Right, understood. But are we going to get a chance to provide comments to this spreadsheet that already assigned the lead agencies?
The comments that we're inviting you to submit are on anything you want to comment on. So your votes or any other comments that a task force member would want to have as part of the record
Okay,
will be included.
thank you.
So again, Ken Klimo from Wilkes. So I'm compelled to ask whether it might be worth our while to spend a few minutes to actually revisit maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of the recommendations that were that met with the most resistance. And again, I'm troubled by the fact that about half of the committee, the task force, actually voted. And you know, again, you don't really know whether the will of the committee was really you know, represented. So now that we have everybody here, I don't know whether we want to have any, you know, just have further discussion about some of those items, or whether to have a straw vote on them. It just seems that right now we're leaving something where maybe we have some time and opportunity to be able to hash through a few things.
Denise?
I'm going to just follow up on what Ken suggested, and then something that Secretary you suggested about finding recommendations that have a maximum number of agreement and cutting those off. And you're speaking of on the other side of that equation, which is going to the other end of the scale, and suggest that we may, as a body, want to have a discussion of those that we all generally agree on within a certain percentage, and use those as sort of the broader discussion, which I think we're missing still at this point, and that is what will be valuable to the governor and to the public when they see this report. And I think one of the key components could be that we as a body agree that in principle, these are the recommendations that should drive the pipeline industry in Pennsylvania. And having a discussion of those that are the top ones in agreement sets us in a discussion of sort of how to set standards for the industry in a much broader sense. I think we're getting dragged down a little bit in minutia with 100 and, how many recommendations?
184.
184.
At last count.
Many of which are very good recommendations, but really don't hit that broad stride. And I think the whole reason why many of us believe we're here is to help drive that discussion from a broader industry standard.
Well, let's look at slide 3. We have identified the areas of overlap. So when you talk about where there is broad agreement on a concept, it's right in front of you. So if folks would like to have some conversation about this, and this is And one of the reasons we presented this is to show where there was a substantial amount of overlap from the work group. You have, again, an incomplete voting record, but the data from the work groups certainly suggests that if you just look at the top 10, there seems to be the areas where there is a substantial amount of input and consensus that these are areas that need to be focused on.
I would agree that there is a thematic list of issues that have been raised. I would disagree that there's a substantial amount of consensus on those themes. Part of my concern in echoing not having all of the data in front of us is not really being able to prioritize. And I think to me that's kind of what Denise was talking about is, yes, there are emerging themes, but how would we prioritize those emerging themes? And I'm not sure that voting actually says a priority. I think we would agree on certain things, but I'm not sure that what we would agree on would have the highest priority and what we feel would absolutely help build out the infrastructure. So the low-hanging fruit, I think those are the ones that everybody agrees on, but maybe the low-hanging fruit aren't the priorities.
Other thoughts?
So maybe within the voting process, and this could be a little cumbersome, but fortunately we have an extra week. We not only vote on the recommendations, but maybe there's a process by which we vote on the top 15 or 20 as members of the task force. I mean, I don't know, that's not a lot out of 180 something, but it might give us some sense for discussion at least on the 20th of kind of how we want to, whether we want to talk about it in terms of general themes. Maybe we find that by us each individually identifying our top maybe 20, we can say that maybe there is some general consensus in some of those themes. Just a thought.
Reactions?
Bill Kiger from PA One Call. I think we need to look at also things that can be done without cost, with very little coordination can be done so that we can increase that 20 to maybe 50.
I just picked that out of the air. Not married to 20.
Well, just, realistically, how much can you get done in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and so on? Obviously, you can start and pick off the ones that are relatively simple to deal with and address those first. And that gives you more traction to move on to the more difficult ones.
Wayne?
I kind of like the idea of the task force members setting up 4 or 5 of their top priorities and giving them a weight. And that can be tabulated, and then we could have a consensus if we were to look at everybody's top 5 priorities and the weight that it carries and see what comes out on top.
So is the suggestion to essentially do another poll before the final vote? A poll asking each member of the task force to rank order their top 5, 10, whatever that number is, and then we come back with another set of data that we'll discuss at the last meeting. Is that the process? Go ahead.
Sarah Battisti, I'd like to make a suggestion that, not that I don't want to vote again, if that's what you want us to do, but you gave us, we'll recall our charge, and we have 5 bullets here that all of these 184 recommendations should, in theory, fall under. So if you want us to sit around the table next time and have consensus, I would suggest a generalization of these 5 things. We can all agree that we want to work on these 5 things. That's why we're all here, right? If you want us to sign a document, if you want us to find consensus, can we put these 184 recommendations in each of the buckets that they go into here? And can we work from it in that respect? Because when the governor comes out and talks about this, and David, you're here, and Sam, you're here, how will the governor speak about this, and how will he organize it in his mind? And if this was our charge, and this is what we want to talk about, then this should be coherent enough for all of us around the table to speak about it in a quick, easy fashion to say, yes, we gained consensus. Yes, we have 184 recommendations that we're obviously going to work on further. But maybe that's the way we put all of these into these buckets.
Okay, well, let me ask a clarifying question. If we could, and some of it would be arbitrary, decide which bucket, because again, because of the overlap, you could put things in different buckets, so beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Once we organized 184 recommendations into these 5 buckets, then what? What's the process from there?
Sarah Battisti. I think for the January 20th meeting, it is, if you can pick out the ones that are the ones that mean the most, if you want to vote again, and that's fine, vote again. But in an effort to organize this in some sort of manner, if there's a better way, that's fine. But I think that, again, if we can generalize things, and instead of we're not going to sit here, go line by line on 184 recommendations. That's pretty clear. Much to the dismay of some of us who wanted to have a conversation about all 184 recommendations. So I'm just trying to find a way to organize this in a coherent fashion for all of us to be able to find some sense of organization and be able to respond to it. So the answer is, I don't know. I'm just trying to.
Maybe, Dave.
Hold
Sorry,
on.
Cindy Ivy again.
And
To
Dave.
Sarah's point, maybe, we had a discussion in our work group as to whether the recommendations would come out by work group or by topic, knowing that there would be some overlap. To Sarah's point, maybe the better way to organize the final report is by the charge of the 5 buckets and which recommendations fall into those. So that's one thought. On the not having to do another survey, as one who filled out and spent an inordinate amount of time on it, one way that you might be able to address Wayne's concern and mine as far as prioritization and weighting is, and I can see that I would answer some of these recommendations, yes, in concept, but, okay, and that would be the comments. So you might be able to say, and I might be able to say yes, but I would weight it as a agree but not strongly agree. So you might be able to have a 1 to 5 sort of, I agree, and how much do I agree? And that would weight sort of that and have it be part of that. Yes, and weight it a certain number. And then you get one survey done and you get both an agreement or disagreement to a certain extent, but then you also get a prioritization or a weight that the task force member would apply to that particular recommendation.
Well, and I'm not sure that we have a statistician clever enough to combine those two things, which is why I would probably suggest a 2-step process. We have actually already started grouping the recommendations. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I wanted it to kind of come out of the task force rather than throwing everything as a foregone conclusion. The idea of grouping beneath the governor's charge is something that we have actually taken a first whack at. And in terms of then how you express the priorities, I think really gets to the nub of the issue. It's how do we measure consensus? How do we weight the input of the task force members? I can't think of a way to do it that isn't ridiculously complicated, which is why we're proposing to come back to the idea of voting. So it all comes, we can do it in the following way. Group all of the 184 recommendations in those 5 buckets. And then you vote on each bucket. And whatever recommendations get the most votes in each bucket, or the top 5 in each bucket, they go into the executive summary as the consensus. I'm not sure if there's a way mechanically to do it any other way, again, especially given the time that we have, without maybe bringing in a team of statisticians from Penn State University to design some kind of an elaborate voting process.
Steve Tambini. I'd actually be fine resting at that recommendation. But you did go through the effort of coming up with general recommendation topics, which I think for the most part are on target. Perhaps, there's 23 of them. Perhaps there's a few there's 2 there. Some of those maybe you could split out, maybe get to 25. But I would see again, I could rest and say, look, you've collected data, everyone voted, the top 10 or the top 15, whatever the cliff is, that's it. That's in the executive summary. But I don't think that would tell us as much if we did do a little bit of voting on the topics and just said, look, here's the 25 topics. Hopefully we could agree on what the topics are because we've collected data already. You've got 25 of them. Force rank your top 10 and see where it lands. At the same time we're voting on the recommendations. Lay out those 25 topics and say, okay, everybody, you've got 10 votes, 1 to 10. You've got 25 choices. What are the top 10 that lean right into the original charge recommendations? And not a whole lot of debate because it's really not, we're not trying to redefine what the areas are. Those areas bubbled up from the work group recommendations. A bunch of people recommended landscape level planning or DEP permitting process improvements. That's just a heading. So force rank your top 10 and see what rises up to the top. Collect more data and then present it back.
I don't mean to complicate things. But in the discussion, when we were talking about originally ranking our top 10, I was wondering in terms of those persons that are on the task force that actually led a work group, would they probably not focus on the work group and that would be their top 10 or whatever. And then we started talking about the discussion as recommended by Sarah to maybe put all 184 recommendations under what is our charge for this task force. And my thought process was, in looking at all 184 and looking at the 5 in terms of our charge, I'm not sure that all 184 would fit under those 5 categories. So are we prepared as a task force to say which ones we don't think actually fit within those 5? That's why I said, I don't mean to make things complicated, but that was my response for each of the things that we just discussed.
Well, I think in terms of providing some coherence for our collective message to the governor, and then the messaging that will ensue to the public, saying what doesn't count is probably a lot less important than what does, and what are the priorities. I would suggest that our task is to be affirmative and really to present a list of the things that should be focused on going forward relative to pipeline development, not necessarily saying, oh, this stuff falls outside the charge. I would rather us focus our energy on providing that kind of coherence on the positive side.
Mr. Secretary, Alan Brinzer, Pennsylvania Emergency Management. By virtue of the fact that you went through and identified overlapping, and you look at the first category of 19, that's a pretty popular topic among many. So it would statistically rise to the top. And again, not to overcomplicate things, but going back to your original vote, I think it actually simplifies the process. Because when you go to individually voting on those elements, I can tell you in the mapping one, which I believe there are 9 overlapping, a lot of subjects, a lot of people are viewing GIS mapping very differently. In emergency management, it is about access, identifying points, locations, giving emergency workers an opportunity to respond to an incident, to protect the public who might be in a certain marker position. It doesn't have to do with public access, although I received a number of comments about not interested because of public access. We have a transparent program and maps are going to be drawn and people. Our recommendation is based upon emergency response. And while it may overlap with 9 others, it's not necessarily the same thing as it's nuanced a bit differently.
And that's the challenge of looking at it in terms of what overlaps. That's precisely the challenge. which is why the simplest way to handle this would be a straight vote. But again, that's why we're here to talk this afternoon. Dwayne.
I look back at the previous slide with the mission and goals and the term best practices and relating that back to some of the things we discussed in the first meeting. That being that changes the regulations. 2 years, did we say about 2 years? You know, there are a lot of things in our recommendations that are going to involve some very significant changes to regulations, changes in funding. But there's also some things that we can do today, you know, like seed mixes. We can change seed mixes, and the DEP currently has the authority to change the BMPs to address those things. So as I go through and I'm like, trying to understand, explain to my 9-year-old daughter what we're doing here is I would like to have something at the end of the day saying, this is a positive change that we did, and we did it quickly. The regulatory things, and we know we have information to collect, we have other studies from other states, we have success stories and things like that we can all quantify that, but the things that we can do today, somewhere got lost along the mix, and it may be because we had a significant amount of conversation within the work groups, but this task force together collectively didn't have the same kind of storming, norming, and performing opportunities that we did in the work groups. So if there is any way, and if you're looking for volunteers, I think a number of us from the work groups would be willing to volunteer to go through and identify those things that could be enacted today or at least provided or developed as a BMP prior to this January 20th date. And in terms of the regulations and changes in policy and things of that nature, that's up to the government and the legislator to work out. Because whatever we put in this report necessarily isn't going to dictate what the legislature does or what the governor does, but there are certain things that we can do to show this is an early win.
That's certainly one approach. And again, I would say that in terms of the follow-on work, again, all of the environmental protection recommendations, or at least most of them, are going to fall in DEP's lap. And our job is to actually move on stuff that can be done quickly. So we are actually designing now, in real time, a BMP manual. We're compiling that right now. So that would be an early, the way we have scheduled the work, given the fact that we don't have an infinite number of staff. We've incidentally lost 671 staff in the last 7 years. The way that we can handle the work is to embody the recommendations of the task force in a BMP document that would come out sometime next year. But that is a definite action and a definite outcome of this task force. Now, whether it happens on January 16th or sometime next year, it's something that's going to happen. Just like e-permitting is something that this task force is recommending, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. So there are definite outcomes here. Whether we have whether we have something like that, and whether it adds a lot of value to do it before January is an open question.
Considering the time and the complexity, I'll retract everything else I said before, except this, you're going to have data on votes, obviously, that's going to make sense from an executive summary standpoint. You have some data on overlap. You could certainly use it in an executive summary. You have some data, so you can use it without going back out. I think the other piece that's missing that you're going to have data on is you're going to have some themes coming out of the public comment as well. So that needs to be, I think that needs to be summarized in the executive summary as well. So I think, considering the path, the timing, the complexity, I think that's a simple representation of where the task force landed. Certainly, we could go out and get more data, but it sounds like, the complexity of it isn't going to lend itself to the time and the task.
Marvin.
Marvin Mateer. As I'm listening to the conversation, it just seems to me that as a task force, this task that we're talking about is nearly impossible. If we're looking for the most important kinds of things that we want to put at the top, we all know what those are, I think. First would be the safety of the citizens of Pennsylvania. And secondly would be those items that protect our environment. I mean, that to me is a no-brainer. On the other hand, I'm not sure how many people sitting around the table would put the concerns of our local government group up at the top. And I'm not putting anybody down. I'm just saying, when it comes to prioritizing these, I would be most interested in the safety and the environmental concerns. And I think when it comes down to the end, unfortunately, if we're continue this discussion, we're going to end up settling for something that's not what everybody wants. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just thinking to myself that as we go through and we're going to vote for these, it seems like that would shake out in the end, that maybe this isn't the right time to do this. Just my thoughts.
Denise Brinley. Marvin, I appreciate what you're saying, but I do think there is hope in this process. And just flipping through the scores, there are a number of there are a number of recommendations that exceed 90%, and those are the ones that I think would rise to the level of public safety and the environment and workforce preparedness and all the very things that I think people around this table could agree upon as broad-based recommendations. And maybe looking at the bulk of them as other ones that aren't as well developed, but which can be looked at through agency representation and additional engagement by the task force. So with that, I would recommend that we at least discuss the ones that exceed 90% on this list.
Some other thoughts? Go ahead.
Marvin Matera again, and I'm not disagreeing with what you say. At least we're far enough apart that we can't hurt each other. And I don't have a problem with discussing those. I guess my problem comes when we come down to the end, do we say to the governor, these are the most important? Because I think there are some things that are most important to me that are different than everybody else, most important to Lauren that are different than everybody else, so forth. But these may be at the top of the list as far as priorities go to the people of Pennsylvania.
And that involves value judgments. And again, there's 47 people on this task force, and I'm not necessarily convinced that we are going to be able to arrive at that list other than by voting. So whether we present those recommendations that get, again, when it's 90% and above, is it 80% above? Is 75% consensus? This is why we left as much time as we did today for conversation, to try to tease through some of this and arrive at some kind of a path forward here. We would like to deliver a clear message. There's a lot of data here that this report is going to present. This is a very complicated topic. So if there are some central messages that we can convey with confidence, how do we get at those in a way that makes sense? And again, I'm looking at voting, and we can slice and dice, we can sort any number of ways, and I'm looking for suggestions on how we do that that folks are comfortable with. Senator, you had your hand up, and then Dave.
The only thing I was going to say is to what Marvin was trying to say. You see, everyone here represents an interest, and it's very hard to get a common communal interest. But from the point of view of local officials and the point of view of us in the legislature who hear from local officials, really this matter of who has authority in terms of zoning on whether it's the state, whether it's the township, is the most crucial issue we face and is one of debate. So I think all that is the difficulty is we're appointed to the task force because we represent a constituency, all right? It could be that we represent the industry. It could be that we represent a township. But right away, the interest of the township, and for example, I mean, to be blunt, the interests, say, of Sunoco and the township are different at this stage of the game. And that's why we have conflict. But there are ways so to say, we have to look at what's going on and say, we need to resolve that. We need to find a way that we can get gas to people and in a safe and environmental way and be respectful to the townships, but still get the gas because it's essential for economic development. So I guess the difficulty is, how do you take varying interests and make sure that each of those, the secretary, get expressed? And the second issue is, on one hand, you're presenting this to the governor, but in essence, you're really, there's two things. Are you simply presenting this to the governor, and then the governor interprets it and presents it to the public? Or are you presenting this really to the public as a whole when you do this, and then the debate or discussion can begin? Because if you're only saying it's to the governor, then the political aspects come in, because the other party will say we agree or don't agree based because the governor said it, or vice versa. So you have to be concerned not only to represent, and I hope I'm not too confusing what I'm saying, not only to represent the various constituencies here, to make sure they each have some kind of say, and admit where there's conflicts, and then say we have to solve them, because we absolutely do, in a way that's fair to everyone, in a way that's fair to townships, but also takes care of our economic interests as a Commonwealth. But at the same time, we have to be careful who, while it's to the governor, it's also a public statement. And you have to avoid the discussion at the end ending up in a way where people start to take sides, and how we do that. So I guess it's both how you get the input in and what you do at the end, Mr. Quigley, which is not easy, as you know, John.
Not at all. Dave, did you have something, please?
I wish I would have taken, Dave Callahan, I wish I would have taken a few more math classes in school. That's all. I'm not a statistician, but I mean, when we deal with consensus with the jobs that we do, we know it and we see it, but I guess if we have to peg a number to it, I mean, you threw out a few options. I mean, consensus with a group as wide-ranging as this, representing as many interests as we have, I would say the number has to be higher, or the percentage has to be higher to truly represent consensus. And I don't know if it's something that you know it when you see it, but maybe we start out higher at, like you mentioned, 90, and see where we go from there.
Kirk Beyondich, I kind of agree. I mean, it's hard to say what's 90% when we're not really representing everyone in the room at the voting.
Wayne, did you have your hand up?
Wayne Gardner. I still supported the weighted voting. I think that as diverse as this task force is, thinking that we're going to have some overwhelming consensus on any of the 184 topics is all but impossible. I do think that through the weighted voting process, though, we might be able to allow many of the items that we can agree on in some way, shape, or form to percolate to the top. And that would gin up the next phase of discussion. But I don't think that either avoid voting or trying to go through multiple series of further discussion is going to be all that helpful.
Keith Coyle, Van Ness Feldman. I would agree with Wayne and the suggestion that Cindy had earlier. Instead of doing yes, no, abstain, that we can do something like strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and then neutral or abstain, just to give, if we're going to go through the process of voting, we can just get some more data, and then it'll show, I mean, who knows what it'll show, but maybe it will show areas where there are a lot of people with strong agreement, or it's an easier, I think, way of trying to get some more data. You still get yes, no, because you have agree, disagree, and then you get a little more sense of what people are really passionate about.
Al Brenzer, FEMA. Statistically, again, that probably makes sense, because when you take a look at doing a gradient like that, if you just went to a yes, no, and abstain, if you don't have a dog in this fight for a particular recommendation, should you be voting? Or if you don't have the expertise, should you be casting it to one side or another? And yet, if you do have an overwhelming number of people who are supporting something, it will rise to the top almost just because of the number of people. But in that weighted scale, that might actually get you there, because somebody like me would be more apt to at least register a comment, even though it might be low or middle.
Good point.
All right, I'm looking at the clock here. It might be time for a break. This has been a really good conversation. Let me put a straw man on the table when we come back in 10 minutes at 2:40 and see if we can move this further along. So let's come back at 2:40. Let's get started again. First, I want to thank everybody for the input and the comments. In the first part of the meeting, I think, was really helpful. I think we had to have that conversation to try to get to something that is more reflective of our work and certainly more in keeping with what the governor had asked us to do. And I think what I heard, and I'll put this straw man on the table, is that to better reflect our work and the governor's charge, what we would do is group the 184 recommendations into the 5 buckets from the charge. Recommended a series of best practices for bucket number 1, planning, siting, and routing pipelines to avoid/reduce environmental and community impacts. Bucket number 2, amplifying and engaging in meaningful public participation. Number 3, maximizing opportunities for predictable and efficient permitting. Number 4, employing construction methods that reduce environmental impact. And number 5, developing long-term operations and maintenance plans to ensure pipeline safety and integrity. And if there are some outliers, we will identify them as such. Once we group those recommendations into those buckets, recognizing that because of the overlap, you could probably put more than one recommendation in more than one bucket, so we'll give it our best shot. Then what we would do is a weighted vote, where 5 is strongly agree, 4 is agree, 3 is neutral, or we'll work out the 1 to 5. 1 being disagree, strongly, 2 disagree, 3 neutral, 4 agree, 5 strongly agree, so that you have a chance to express the weight of your vote on each of the recommendations. And then at the last meeting, we'll present the data in that format. We'll sort them in descending order, reflecting which recommendations got the highest weighted vote, and we'll decide at the last meeting where to draw the line in terms of that executive summary type document. How's that sound?
Very good.
Any conversation or discussion or disagreement about that? I'm not seeing any, which I think is a good thing. Go ahead.
I just feel that it's Bill Kiger from PA One Call. I think there are 2 major concerns, no matter what bucket you're looking at, and I think safety is obviously number 1. Whether it be safety to the public, to the facilities underground, and to the environment. So those are the things I think each of those buckets should consider when you're voting.
Well, again, we could specifically call out safety in that 5th bucket. So again, we have a pretty clear statement, the organizing principles, and again, I don't want to overcomplicate this thing any more than it already is. I think we all agree the safety of the public is paramount. So within that 5th bucket, there are a series of recommendations, and there will be an opportunity to have a weighted vote on those recommendations, and the cream will rise to the top. Frankly, I expect that when everybody votes, we will be surprised at the level of strongly agree. I think we're a lot further along than we realize because we've had some incomplete votes to this point. But other questions, comments?
Denise Brinley, just speaking on behalf of the Department of Community and Economic Development and the Natural Gas End Use Work Group. There are a number of recommendations that fall outside of those particular best practices, which will have to be incorporated into a workforce and economic development and end use bullet point.
Right. And we are going to prepare kind of the thematic, that'll be DEP's task to take on the thematics. And of course, the governor, as we've said at the outset, in fact, I think at our first meeting, the governor is very focused on not only the responsible development and reducing the impact, but getting the jobs that lie potentially at the ends of these pipelines, make as much stuff as possible with gas in state and burn as much of it as possible in state to create the maximum economic opportunity for the state. So we'll have a sixth bucket, or if there needs to be a seventh, but we're certainly going to capture the work of the workforce and economic development work groups. Other discussion? So we are agreed that a weighted vote, grouped weighted vote is the way to go. Speak now or forever hold your peace if you disagree. Okay, great. And again, I really appreciate everybody's input on this. This was an important conversation to have to make sure that this, A, the process, and B, the report have the integrity that we've all brought to the conversation. Are there other issues that any member of the task force would like to bring up? Because we do have a number of folks that have signed up for public comment, and I think the more time we have for that, the better. So are there other issues that anyone would like to bring up at this point?
Small, after all of, I think after the major issue there, this will seem like small potatoes, but just one thing that I noticed on Pipeline Safety and Integrity Work Group Recommendation 9, it seems like the title doesn't quite reflect the recommendation, and it's just a little bit of a nit, but I think an important one. It says designate PA1 call as an enforcement agency for underground utility line protection law. I think that it's supposed to be designate the Public Utility Commission.
And that, Mr. Secretary, if I could answer that, we already put that in, and the exec, I think DEP is going to be making those changes, but we stated that twice, that you're correct, the title is inaccurate.
Right.
It's to make the PUC.
Okay, just wanted to get that on the record. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? Okay, then let us move to the public comment period. We have about 24 folks, I think, at last count, that have signed up. Again, as always, we're asking folks to limit their comments to 2 minutes apiece, and what I will do is call the batting order, 3 names. If folks will step to the podium and say your name for us. There is a comment box as you're coming in the door, because we just don't have any room in here, so if you will leave any written comments that you have in that box. But let's get right to it. And I will apologize in advance for mispronouncing any names. First commenter will be Ellie Salahub, followed by Jane Popko, followed by Craig Stevens.
Hello, my name is Ellie Salahub, and I'm here on behalf of Lebanon Pipeline Awareness in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. The Paris Climate Agreement has been adopted by nearly 200 countries, including ours. The critical question is, how do fracking, pipelines, and this industry-laden task force contribute to achieving the goal of net zero emissions by the second half of this century? The science is incontrovertible. Fossil fuels are the significant cause of climate change. Natural gas, a misnomer for methane, has an initial impact that is 100 times greater than carbon dioxide on global warming. Exxon scientists doing research in the 1970s and 80s concluded that the world's use of fossil fuels would warm the planet and could eventually endanger humanity. No one now can reasonably deny this conclusion. We have the empirical data supported by advancements in technology and scientific research the planet is presently endangered. The fracking and pipeline industries that operate in the global economy have no corporate allegiance or concern for the welfare of any nation state or citizens, including all of us here at this table. These corporations are beholden to shareholders' profits and protecting fossil fuel extraction. Another critical problem is our state legislature is tax and spend adverse, so it is inevitable that agencies meant to protect us and our environment will remain underfunded, understaffed, and unable to enforce even the weakest regulations and policies. There is no audible voice at this table or from the administration saying no to pipeline development and fracking. The public can only exhort all of you from the periphery to stop the trajectory of this retrograde energy plan. Methane gas is categorically not a transition fuel. It is a dangerous climate-changing fossil fuel. And I would say stop this Faustian exercise and commit to renewable energy. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Jane Popko, followed by Craig Stevens, followed by Etta Albright.
Jane Popko. When this task force was being formed, I submitted an application. My application, as well as others who were interested in preserving Pennsylvania's farmland, forest, waters and air, as well as safety, health, and property of those in direct path of these pipelines was rejected. Why wasn't the Union of Concerned Scientists, Penn Environment, Clean Air Council, to name a few, part of this council? Doesn't this task force have an obligation to uphold the Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 27, which I'm sure you all know? John Dernbach, who was at the Paris Summit, is a professor of Widener University School of Law and constitutional researcher, points out that the Pennsylvania's environmental constitutional amendment makes environmental protection part of the constitutional purpose of state government. The environment is given the same legal protection afforded to individual property rights, and balanced against those rights is directed toward environmentally sustainable development. State officials, especially the governor, have a moral, ethical, legal, and fiduciary responsibility as trustees of state resources to protect these resources for the beneficiaries and for future generations. Natural resources are the common property of all people now and forever. The governor's legal constitutional duty is to conserve, maintain those resources for all, not just the gas drilling industry. Pennsylvania is not for sale, despite what the fossil fuel industry thinks. Would we be here if fracking and the required pipelines have not been brought to Pennsylvania's Marcellus Shale area by the Bush-Cheney energy policy? This made fracking exempt from key provisions of the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. The pipeline companies represented here on this task force has no interest in protecting the state we call home. They are interested in profits only. As part of the task force, we have asked for open meetings with Williams, represented on this task force by Cindy Ivey, and Sunoco, represented by John McKinn. Yet these companies continue to disregard this request, and Cindy Ivey is chair of the public participation.
Jane, can you wrap up, please?
Okay. In view of the Paris Summit on climate change, Pope Francis's encyclical, and volumes of scientific evidence, the only logical and ethical document that should be submitted to the governor from the task force would be recommendations to declare a moratorium on fracking and pipelines in Pennsylvania. This would be accompanied by evaluation of renewable energy sources and how to move PA toward a common energy, free carbon energy future. This would support the economic development you talk about. The state can no longer be bought by the fuel industry. If this industry wants to continue
Please
to
wrap up,
provide
Jane. We're about a
profits
minute over.
to its shareholders. They should move toward renewable investments. If they continue to keep their heads in the sand, that's their choice. But this state has an obligation toward its citizens to uphold the PA Constitution. I hope you will vote your consciences on this from this task force.
Thank you. Next, Craig Stevens, followed by Etta Albright, followed by Frank Bankard, Barnhart, I'm not sure. I can't read your writing. Frank B. So, Craig.
Craig Stevens, sixth-generation landowner, Silver Lake Township, Susquehanna County. Secretary of Public Safety is paramount. Stop putting pipelines in our backyards and compressor stations. The industry is in financial freefall, isn't it, all of you here on the panel that are in the industry? Is the task force going to require bonding, just like any other municipal projects, so they don't dig up our property, leave half pipeline installed, run out of money, and their LLC abandons everybody? Because I see that coming in the near future. What are we going to put in place to protect the public from bad industry decisions, like building pipelines when they're not necessary, when our rig count in Susquehanna County is down from 33 to 3 right now? We're not producing any gas. Why are we rushing to put all these pipelines in? As U.S. rushes to build gas lines, failure rate of new pipes has spiked. The push to build new pipelines to transport abundant shale supplies appears to be having a materially adverse impact on pipeline safety. According to the Public Safety Trust analysis of federal rate, new pipelines are failing at a rate on par with gas transmission lines installed before the 1940s. The new pipelines are failing even worse than the oldest pipelines, Carl Weimer said. The gas transmission lines installed in the 2010s have an annual average incident rate of 6.64 per 10,000 miles over the time considered, even exceeding that of the pre-40s pipes. Those installed prior to 1940 or at unknown dates had an incident rate of 6.08 per 10,000 miles. The next highest incident rate was for pipes installed during the 40s. If it's brand new, if it's all new materials, if everybody was doing their job correctly, why would we have an uptick in failures? Robert Miller, who is the Arizona Corporation Commission's Pipeline Safety Section Supervisor. You can only attribute that, in my personal opinion, to poor construction practices or maybe not enough quality control, quality assurance programs out there to catch these problems before those pipelines go into service. Hey folks, have you had a pipeline installed on your property? I have, or near yours. Did they blow your creek out in your backyard 8 times over 2.5 months? Where the DEP actually shut the company down for doing it? And then, of course, they said they were our partners when they signed us. And those partners, 3 days after that pipeline was completed and started flowing gas, sold to Williams. And then now Williams is getting bought by another company, another corporation. What is this, some kind of Ponzi scheme shale game? We're not interested.
Director, to wrap up, please.
You want to build something on my property, then you should be the person that I come to 5 years from now, 10 years from now. This tells you exactly what this is. Build it, sell it, build it, sell it, LLC, get lost when the problems happen. Shut this task force down and get rid of pipelines and get rid of the gas infrastructure. Let's go renewable. It's my children's future anyway. Not interested in this game. Thank you.
Next, Etta Albright, followed by Frank Bankard. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that one. And then followed by Tom Church.
My name is Etta Albright. I live at 429 Powell Avenue, Crescent, PA, Cambria County, 22nd Legislative District, 9th Congressional District. I am here because I am a grandmother of 2 young children, believe in stewardship and sustainability for goodness sake, and am concerned about the past failures of those appointed to or elected to public office to fulfill responsibilities to use the process of government to uphold values expressed in Article 1, Section 27, see enclosure, of the Pennsylvania Constitution. We cannot and should not enable or condone past failures of the Rendell and Corbett administration to govern and oversee the egregious nature of those representing the shale gas industry by permitting the building of shale gas pipelines. Please recall that shale gas drillers were exempted through the 2005 Halliburton loophole from laws for safe drinking water, clean air, public's right to know, and responsibility for harmful consequences. Pennsylvania and Pennsylvanians have been violated. Industries were permitted to use their own best practices and maintain secrecy in the use of toxic chemicals. Without oversight and enforceable regulations, the industry has and continues to threaten human and environmental health. Now there is grave concern about the impact on the unborn and especially school-aged children. I have lots of materials for you to look at, and I'll show you if I'm allowed at the end of this talk. Planning should have been in place before fracking began and before PA DEP Secretary Kathleen McGetty turned the state over to shale gas drillers in June 2008 and her abrupt resignation from office July 2008. Fingers must also point to the lack of a national energy plan. Energy, like the roadways, are vital for our infrastructure. Last evening, as I was preparing the text for this draft for the pipeline infrastructure development in Pennsylvania and the role of the pipeline infrastructure task force on which I'm commenting, I am more perplexed about the relevancy of the task force since I had attended a court hearing meeting Monday, December 14, 2015, about Sunoco's logistics attempts to secure private property through eminent domain for their planned pipeline, the Mariner East 2. With all the shoulds in the language of the draft, it lends its meaning to represent the interest of our state and residents to be nothing but window dressing for an industry hell-bent on getting as much gas out of Pennsylvania as quickly as possible without liability and just compensations. Because of the oversupply,
Could you wrap up, please?
Because of the oversupply of natural gas, now is a perfect time for a statewide moratorium on the shale industry so that a real and applicable plan based on truth, science, understanding, transparency, and enforceable legislation applicable to needed partnerships among business, industry, consumer citizens in the process of government for acquisition, processing, transporting, and use of resources, gas, without damaging harm to human and environmental health. When consideration and respect for the Paris climate talks and Pope Francis Laudate say about the fossil fuels, it is a morally right action to take. I ask this task force to support a moratorium on the shale gas industry in Pennsylvania to allow science and government to catch up with the industry and in order to form necessary partnerships based on this truth, transparency, and trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Frank B., followed by Tony Church, followed by Ellen Gerhardt.
I want to thank the task force for having me here or letting me speak today. I represent the operating engineers, International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 542. We cover half the state of Pennsylvania. One of the things we've done since the 30s, we build highways, buildings, refineries, airports, railways, and what I'm here to speak about is pipelines. Our guys are highly trained and skilled in installing pipelines. Now, today, if you've had your radio on, you've probably heard that Congress passed the bill to lift the moratorium or the ban on oil exports, the oil export ban in 1973. Now, you guys, some of you guys in the room that remember the early 70s when you had the gas lines, the alternating tags that you could only get gas every other day, every 3 days, the high-rise prices of gas, they put that ban in so we wouldn't lose our fuel in the United States and export it. Probably by the end of this week, that ban's going to be lifted. Now, this Mariner pipeline, all you guys that might be against it or for it, you know it's going to go through. Now, I agree, safety is the utmost concern here for you guys. I came in here late. I didn't see any horses outside. I didn't see any bicycles outside. Everyone drove in here. So somebody must be using this fossil fuel and this gas. What I'm emphasizing on, we need gasoline. We need the methane. We need the fuels. Let's do it safely. Let's use trained Pennsylvanians to do it. When you're talking about unsafe acts in Pennsylvania, look at the companies that are doing the unsafe acts. They're wildcatters that are coming in from all over the United States that have no equity into this economy or this commonwealth. They don't pay the taxes here. They don't pay unemployment taxes. All right? They're actually like leeches to the economy. But if, and a lot of the people are against unions, if you have a union worker on that workforce, okay, and you should be looking at PLAs on these pipelines, a union worker has a voice at his job site. So he's like the cop, making sure that contractor performs that standard. Because we live here. Our children go to school here. We work here. We have a stake in this economy. So when you guys convene and all like that and talk to the governor, make sure the governor knows that the Pennsylvania building trades are the most efficient, the most safe workforce out there to put these pipelines in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Tom Church, followed by Ellen Gerhardt, followed by Elise Gerhardt.
Thank you for the chance to talk to you, to give my opinion. My name is Thomas Church. I live along the Delaware River in eastern Pennsylvania. There are a few catchwords that I'd like to mention. Local, I loved when I heard that. Health, I like when I hear that. Environment, I like when I hear that. Renewables, I like a lot when I hear that. And I would like to see our economy move farther in that direction. I want to read this cobbled up piece that I wrote here, but basically, I worked for Consumers Gas Utility in the heart of the shale fields of West Virginia from 1978 to 1990. I was certified to weld plastic pipe on pipeline crews, trained in cathodic pipeline protection, and licensed to test and repair meters and regulators by the state of West Virginia. 2 of the 4 shale wells drilled on my farm in the 1980s were donated to a charity by the time I moved back up north, so the producer could avoid the responsibility to maintain or plug them. There was also an old rotted sand well bubbling methane in the creek the whole time I was there. These are things that just are, they go under the radar. There's so many abandoned lines, bad lines that are under the ground. I've seen it all personally. The regulatory system is broken at many levels. Gathering lines in my time down there were run on top of the ground and are still unregulated as far as I know. I don't know Pennsylvania's as well. The utility I worked for replaced minimally leaking pipeline running through farm fields to get footage to justify periodic rate increases from the PUC and practice crisis management in towns, just as they are doing now. There's a lot of leakage within cities. There's a lot of documentation about that. Compliance at all levels that are regulated is expected, but government has minimal resources to check or enforce a huge grid. I believe the regulatory priorities that are in place today need to be flipped upside down from the concept of quantity of life expressed as building and consuming to quality of life expressed as eliminating waste, maintaining and fixing current infrastructure, and protecting the Earth's stability in air and water and even geological structure. Before it even gets to the pipeline, we have allowed the removal of precious water that people are killing all over the world from the cycle of life by pumping it from our watersheds, changing it from being life-giving to life-taking, and pumping it as poisonous fluid into the ground we walk on. How dumb is that?
Tom, could you wrap up, please?
Yes. One other thing was that I've worked on a local situation in Forks Township, a compressor that was moved from being 2,000 horsepower to 25,000 horsepower by Columbia Gas. And when we talked to the local supervisors all said individually to us that they were against this expansion. We live here too. We don't like this. And they said that they were superseded to the point where the last meeting we went to, the head of the committee, before we even spoke, made a statement that he wanted the public to know that they had done everything they could do to try to slow this down. And it was in protected farm. It is in protected farmland. It's been completed and it's been permitted. There was an industrial park that's 1 mile away on their pipeline that this could have been moved into. It's in protected farmland. It's zone protected farmland. It's listed on their map, their zoning map, as an office. This is all really unacceptable. you know?
Wrap up,
So
please, Tom.
thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Next, Ellen Gerhardt, followed by Elise Gerhardt, followed by Thomas Au.
You're about to be double teamed by the Gerhardt family. Okay, my name is Ellen Gerhardt. I'm a retired public school teacher, Huntington County. My husband Stephen and I bought our property in 1982. Not long after we purchased the property, we joined the Forest Stewardship Program, where we pledged not to develop our land, to keep it as natural as possible, to protect the forest on there, and to protect the waterways on there. The state is now contemplating letting an out-of-state company come in and trample over this land, trample over Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and not for public good, for private profit. The company plans to come in and clear-cut the trees that we pledge to protect, cover waterways with temporary workspace, all under the guise of being a public utility. They are not a public utility. They are using certificates from the 1930s that claim those certificates give them the permission and the permitting rights to come in and build, essentially, by their own testimony, any number of pipelines that they choose, anywhere they choose. This is not benefiting Pennsylvania. As landowners paying our taxes and pledging to protect the property, we still will have to pay the taxes, although we will not be able to protect the property because companies are coming in, and I'm speaking about Sunoco in particular, because this is the Mariner East 2 project that we're talking about. Coming in, they are not responsible for taxes. They are not responsible for benefiting anything in Pennsylvania. They're claiming, by their own admission, Pennsylvania uses 22 to 27,000 barrels of propane. The Mariner East 1, which is already in commission, provides 77,000 barrels. The proposed Mariner 2 will provide 275,000 barrels of propane, ethane, butane to be shipped overseas via contracts that are already signed with pipeline completion and delivery promised by the end of next year. I find something grossly unfair about this whole thing. I feel betrayed by the state. I am trying to keep my pledge of keeping Pennsylvania the way it is, and I don't see that happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Elise Gerhardt, followed by Thomas Au, followed by Tom Pallison.
Okay, so this task force is not doing what it says it's doing, which is supposedly reducing environmental and community impacts with regards to pipeline infrastructure expansion. You're sitting here trading niceties with each other, talking about how you're going to clear-cut woodlands, bulldoze homes, and pollute waterways in the nicest possible way. This is a marketing venture. You're sitting around here trying to put lipstick on a pig and sell it to the public. You keep talking about the need to educate the public and the landowners who would be impacted. Well, we know what's going on. We're the eyes and ears on the ground. We know what's best for our homes, for our farms, for our wildlands. And we're here to educate you, but you're not listening. You're allotting 1 day to review public comment before voting on these recommendations. And as of a month ago, I know that there was over 10,000 pages already. I don't know how many there are now, but that's not enough time. You're obviously not taking anything the public has to say into consideration, and it's pathetic. We are stakeholders. Companies from Texas are not. This is our state. And Secretary Quigley, I hope that you realize that this is your legacy and that you work for the Department of Environmental Protection. I don't think you're taking that very seriously.
Next, Thomas Au, followed by Tom Pallison, followed by Ralph Bloom, I think it is.
Good afternoon.
My name is Thomas Howe. I'm here representing the Conservation Committee of the Sierra Club. This draft report does not address the fundamental policy question of whether any more pipelines are needed or are in the public interest. I think you will all admit that there's a glut of shale gas on the market. How are you going to sell additional shale gas in the market that's already saturated? The answer to the question might very well be that the Commonwealth should not be spurring more pipeline infrastructure until it has a full accounting of the cost and benefit, including the environmental costs. That's your obligation under Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. With all due respect to you, Mr. Secretary, the administration lacks credibility in adopting and enforcing strong safety standards and implementing environmental protection on the ground. The departments, as many of the people here will admit, departments charged to implement this report do not have the resources to carry out many of the recommendations. Before the public can believe any of the recommendations, we must see additional field staff, enforcement actions, and permit denials based on substance. For years, we have been told that shale gas drilling would be tightly regulated. That regulation has not yet occurred. Gathering lines, in particular, are not regulated for safety, particularly in rural areas. Sending recommendations without realistic resources to the governor creates another pipe dream. Thank you.
Next, Tom Pallison, followed by Ralph Bloom, followed by Dave Fertig, I believe it is.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Pallison. I'm the Executive Director of the Manufacturers Association. And on behalf of our association, I want to thank the governor and his administration for initiating this process and comment at all the task force members who volunteered their time to study these issues and complete this draft report. In more than 330 pages and with the input of a diverse group of stakeholders, the draft report is an incredible undertaking. For the sake of time, I'd like to focus my comments on two specific sections, the natural gas end use and workforce and economic development, both of which align closely with our association's goals and our members' interest. Our manufacturing association is a regional trade organization with more than 360 member companies located in South Central Pennsylvania. In addition to serving as an advocate for manufacturing and its related businesses and industries, the association helps members be more competitive, productive, and profitable in an ever-changing, increasing global marketplace. We believe increased access to an abundant, low-cost natural gas can provide competitive edge, both in helping existing manufacturers here in Pennsylvania, help them grow, and attract new businesses to our local markets. As you know, our region in South Central Pennsylvania doesn't sit squarely within the state shale development, yet we still have companies that have been able to benefit by supplying and supporting those developers, and some of our local manufacturers and businesses have been able to invest in their workforce and operations thanks to lower energy prices. A recent survey by the Philadelphia Federal Reserve reports that lower energy prices will positively impact profitability, lower production costs, and increase sales margins for our state's manufacturers. A PNC survey highlights that 22% of companies plan to add full-time employees due to these lower prices. But this is only the beginning. The benefits of oil and gas development can and should stretch far beyond the wellheads. To ensure that continues to happen, our next step should be committing to safe, reliable energy infrastructure that can deliver this resource to support regional revitalization and sustained economic growth. We have manufacturers currently in this region that leverage this resource now, implementing combined heat and power systems, while other manufacturers are hoping to replace older, less efficient systems with natural gas. Pipeline projects are instrumental in the long-term economic success of our communities in the region. Manufacturing and its affiliated businesses contribute $11 billion to the economy in South Central Pennsylvania alone annually, and provide employment for more than 117,000 employees just in South Central Pennsylvania. But there's more room to develop. The Association of Manufacturers notes that the link between manufacturing and better pipeline infrastructure. In 2015, crude oil pipelines created over 25,000 manufacturing jobs and contributed $4 billion of manufacturing GDP in the U.S.
Could you wrap up, please, Tom?
Infrastructure projects like these discussed by the task force, where significant investments are made in responsible, safe development, will help create even more quality employment opportunities for our region's residents and enable companies to remain and reinvest in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ralph Bloom, followed by Dave Fertig, followed by Elizabeth Downey.
Yeah, my name is Ralph Bloom. I live in Cumberland County near Newville. I've got the old Mariner 1 pipeline running through me and the proposed Mariner 2. And about 20 years ago, we had some words with Sunoco, and they were trying to claim they owned my whole farm to do anything they wanted. Well, we took them to court, and after 12 years, 30 of us did get a amended 40-foot right-of-way agreement with Sunoco in writing. And then whenever in 2013, they come through and they wanted a survey for this new Mariner 2. We refused them permission. We hired an attorney. He sent in the right papers to the court. Sunoco said, we're not doing it anymore. So it was sort of dropped. And about May of this year, I had a 3-day notice. You're going to court. We want permission to survey, and we want permission to go anywhere on your farm to do a repair. So we went to court, and of course, they spoke for about an hour, and whenever our attorney got up to talk, the judge said, you don't have to say any more, my mind's made up. He gave them permission to do anything they wanted to do on our property. Anywhere. We couldn't stop them, he said. So I did try and stop them one night. They were at 7 o'clock at night, there were 3 people walking around my barn, and I told them to get off. The next morning, I get a notice from my attorney, says, if you don't let them there, you're going to jail. Jeff Shields from Sunoco says they don't do this. I got threatened with going to jail twice, and it wasn't very good. They did set up a drilling rig and done a horizontal bore, and they destroyed my wheat crop, they destroyed my hay crop, and they said they'd pay for it. And I made some hay, and I had it raked, and next thing I know, they're running over it with their trucks running in the mud. And they laughed at me. They said, it's tough, that's just the way it is. And this is the kind of treatment I've been getting from the company for 20 years. And while they were doing this drilling, I kept a pretty good eye on them. There was a hose running down to a stream. They were running drilling mud, which is green kitty litter. I don't know what they use. It's some kind of chemicals. Was running into the stream. And I called DEP and the Fish Commission. DEP and the Fish Commission come out. They said, it's okay. We'd rather have them do that and dig up the swamp. So they put 2 hay bales there in front of the hose and said that'll filter it. This is the kind of stuff, I watched them all summer do this.
Could you wrap up, please, Ralph?
Yeah, we'll make her short. I could run here a couple hours if you wanted to. The judge, the new building lot, or new line that goes right through one of my buildings. I guess they want to tear it down, I don't know. I have a building lot there that I wanted to put a retirement home on. That's history, I can't do that. And to make it short and sweet, the judge said they had to do a $5,000 bond to do their survey and a $25,000 bond to do their repair for damages. I gave them estimates, and I did agree with one guy what they were supposed to pay, and I haven't gotten a penny yet. They've ignored me. They don't want to pay me, and as of right now, my 1934 agreement says they will pay for damages. If they don't pay for damages, I guess it's a breach of contract, so Sunoco can stay off my property, and that's fine with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Dave Fertig, followed by Elizabeth Downey, followed by Steve Izzo. Dave Fertig? Not here? Okay, Elizabeth Downey, followed by Steve Izzo, followed by Doug Lorenzen.
Good afternoon. Elizabeth Downey, President of the Pennsylvania State Grange. As president of the Pennsylvania State Grange, the oldest agricultural and rural advocacy organization of its kind in the United States, representing approximately 9,000 residents across the Commonwealth, I would like to offer comments related to the draft final report issued recently by the Governor's Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force. I can tell you firsthand that Pennsylvania farmers have a rich tradition as stewards of the land. We support projects that strike the right balance between respecting the land and putting it to proper use for the benefit of all Pennsylvanians. So for us, like so many others, the issue at hand is pipelines being constructed through Pennsylvania businesses, farms, and homes to transport natural gas for commercial use. I understand people's concerns over safety and pipelines on their land. Study after study and government data have found pipelines are the safest, most environmentally friendly way to transport natural gas and natural gas liquids. Many are raising very good questions about the safety of pipelines, but I have firsthand experience of living with a pipeline across my farm. We continue to utilize our land without issue. The pipeline did not disrupt any farming usage. Many of our farmers and agricultural partners share similar stories. There is an abundance of energy resources in our Commonwealth. The Pipeline Task Force is here to ensure that we develop Pennsylvania's energy resources as safely and efficiently as possible. We believe that safe, responsible development and environmental protection can and will go hand in hand. It's important that regulations and surveys are done to ensure development is safe, but those regulations cannot be so onerous of pipelines that they risk making projects uneconomic. It's important that rules adopted for pipeline development do not go above and beyond those required of other infrastructure and development projects. The recent discussions over natural gas in Pennsylvania have sparked the interest and concern of the Pennsylvania State Grange membership for the future of energy infrastructure in our state. I appreciate this opportunity to voice our support for the proposed pipeline projects going through Pennsylvania. Developing energy resources is an essential component to keeping Pennsylvania's economy growing. Thank you for your time, and I will be submitting my written comments to each of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Steve Izzo, followed by Doug Lorenzen, followed by Pam Bishop.
Hi, I'm not Steve Izzo. He said I could speak in his 2 minutes. My name is Susan Norris. I'm from Harrisburg. My name was way down on the list.
Okay, thank you.
We all know that this so-called task force was created for one reason and one reason only: to allow the fossil fuel industry to continue to do exactly what they've always done, which is to rape Pennsylvania, with just a very thin veneer of pretending to care about the citizens of Pennsylvania. It is a puppet show, a distraction. Right now, there are pipelines being laid, compressor stations being built, water being poisoned, people getting kicked off their land, and you do nothing to stop it or to even slow it down. Nowhere in the text of the mission statement does it say that this infrastructure will not be built. It states that the Commonwealth wants to achieve a world-class pipeline infrastructure system and damn the health of people and planet. Only 3 times in the text of your 335-page document does the phrase climate change appear, and only in reference to reducing infrastructure leaks for maximizing profits for the fossil fuel companies. What you are not concerned with is how will this world-class pipeline infrastructure in any way benefit your children or future generations? How will extracting and transporting any amount of fossil fuels benefit anything but the fossil fuel companies and their toadies? Are you people really that naive in thinking that continuing to mine fossil fuels is a good idea? There is no meaningful public participation because the so-called task force is heavily weighted with industry and pro-industry people. There is no option to stop this infrastructure from being built, which proves that this task force is wholly owned by the fossil fuel industry. My recommendation to this task force is to stop all fossil fuel extraction, infrastructure planning and building today, and then for you to disband, and then for each one of you to devote the rest of your lives to creating a fossil fuel-free society that might give your children some small chance of survival on a planet ravaged by your addiction to fossil fuels. And I want to add one more piece. It's from Article 1, Section 2 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. It states, "All power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of these ends, they have at all times an inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such manner as they think proper." Thank you.
Next, Doug Lorenzen, followed by Pam Bishop, followed by Deidre Lally. Or Lally, sorry.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Lorenzen, and I represent, at least partially, concerned citizens of Lebanon County. Currently, in the U.S. and Pennsylvania, there is an oversupply of natural gas and natural gas liquids, but the gas companies continue to drill new wells and build new facilities to separate out natural gas liquids, ethane, propane, and butane, in spite of the oversupply. The demand for these gas products in the U.S. and PA has been met. The natural gas and natural gas liquids being produced today far exceed our needs. The product being produced above that need is strictly surplus, which must be sold. Where do they sell it? It is not needed in PA in the U.S., so it is sold overseas. To get that product overseas, the gas industry prefers to use gas lines to deliver it to cities. They are expanding port facilities, such as Marcus Hook and the adjoining Delaware port facility, and they are building huge tanker ships in which they can ship the gases overseas, primarily to Norway and Asia, and China in particular. Sunoco, for example, also has facilities in Texas and in Louisiana that they could, if they chose, to ship it to. However, in the words of Mike Hennigan, the Sunoco Logistics CEO and Chief Operating Officer, says it makes more economical sense to ship it 300 miles across PA for shipment to Norway and Europe than it does to ship it 1,500 miles to Texas for shipment to Norway. Also, there are restrictions as to when things can be shipped through the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a further burden there, making the shipment across Pennsylvania a better deal. He has also been quoted as saying that the Mariner Pipeline was aptly named for its main purpose, to ship it overseas. This industry prefers to use pipelines to get the product to market. To do this, the U.S. and the PA grant them eminent domain, a government function, to take private property in order for them to make huge profits by selling the gases overseas. In other words, eminent domain for private gain. The mission, objectives, and purpose of this task force is to develop ways to help facilitate and aid gas companies in developing pipelines. Nowhere is it stated that the need for additional pipelines will be evaluated.
Could you wrap up, please?
For an actual need, yes. And whether the U.S. or PA government will bestow on a private company the use of a government function such as eminent domain. This working group needs to do a number of things. One is to assess the need for additional pipelines if the government will allow private companies to use eminent domain. They also need, the work group should assess whether the pipeline easement should be obtained and owned by private companies. Why not have the U.S. or PA government own the easement? Take private companies the private company should not be allowed to take private property for their own use. This is a government function.
Could you wrap up,
Thirdly,
please, Doug?
yes, what the legislation, there needs to be some new legislation. It is needed to implement and bring easement powers under a central control, and I hope our legislators here will note that. Finally, the working group should look at the legislation that is needed to address the siting, construction, monitoring, and operation and maintenance of the pipeline. Today, there is no there is no law that requires a certain agency to look at this part of it. It needs to be looked at. We cannot have the pipeline companies putting in and constructing pipelines with no one overseeing them and also the operation and maintenance. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Pam Bishop, followed by Deidre Lally, followed by Betsy Conover.
Good afternoon. My name is Pam Bishop. I represent the organization Citizen Volunteers of Concerned Citizens of Lebanon County. We have been involved for over a year with the Sunoco pipeline. There is also a natural gas pipeline, Williams, Atlantic Sunrise in Lebanon County. I would like to say this in all due respect to the members of this task force and in particular to Secretary Quigley. This task force is fundamentally flawed for several reasons. The first being that its mission is incorrect. Its mission is to recognize that there will be a pipeline explosion over the next 10 years, and its purpose is to assist in the pipeline development. So that's the fundamental flaw is your mission is incorrect. There is no evaluation of the need for pipelines, the need for further extraction of fossil fuels in Pennsylvania when Pennsylvania is a net exporter of fuels that are developed here, and we know we do not need any more highways to take those natural resources of Pennsylvania to other parts of the world. Secondly, the fundamental flaw of the task force is its makeup. It is heavily based with industrial members and not members of the public, which is why the public has to speak at this meeting, because we are not represented at this table. And thirdly, the industry that you're dealing with, the pipeline industry, has demonstrated over and over its disrespect and contempt for the laws and procedures that are now in place that should be governing them, but it's easier for them, such as Sunoco, to pay $59,000 in civil penalties to Pennsylvania DEP because they crossed streams without permits when they knew they needed them, and now they say they won't do that again, but they do it over and over. Why are we planning for a 10-year build-out of an industry that is a dying industry? With the people in Paris, 190 countries around the earth coming to agreement that we need to do something about global warming, this is not going in the right direction. It is fundamentally flawed. Thank you.
Next, Deidre Lally, followed by Betsy Conover, followed by Abe Amoros.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Lally. I'm a 7th generation Pennsylvanian, currently debating whether I want to raise an 8th here. I grew up in a county clear-cut 100 years ago from timber. My county is still in ruins from anthracite coal mining. I grew up in the shadow of a nuclear power plant that's currently going to be expanded, and they're going to build a natural gas power plant right next to it. Local agriculture is hanging on by a thread, and now natural gas expansion is our problem. I've worked in public health, so I know that the people in my county are sick, the quality of life is low, pollution and poverty have become normal. Can you imagine that life? And I'm talking to the people representing Pennsylvania, not to the gas industries right now. It's become clear to me that this is just how things always will be in PA because the people in power refuse to dare to talk about better ideas. People who run and support successful local businesses where I'm from are leaving our state because of natural gas expansion. They're sick of it. It's going to be another bust, and you all sitting next to Williams, Shell, Kinder Morgan, Sunoco, you'll have that on your conscience if you don't speak up. I assume at least one of you can imagine the despair of a piece of land sacred to you, torn apart in front of your eyes and polluted for the profit of somebody else, somebody sitting in this room. This is what pipelines are doing all over our state right now, and I need you to talk about that.
Betsy Conover, followed by Abe Amoros, followed by Margaret DeMatelier.
Good afternoon. My name is Betsy Conover, and I live in Dauphin County. I want to comment today on the public participation piece of this report, or rather the lack thereof. Honestly, this comment would have been more appropriate in the draft revision that's been going on here for the last 3 hours. But alas, we, the people, have no one at the table. The public comment section in this 330-page draft has been reduced to one paragraph of 5 sentences buried on page 19. That's it. Three sentences, did you catch that? Summarize the entirety of public comment. Here's the first sentence. The individual's comments range from concerns about the impacts of climate change on Pennsylvania and home and livelihood damages that owners attribute to natural gas drilling, to frustration with pipeline companies' treatment of landowners and communities. First of all, is that even a proper sentence? Please at least give us a readable report. Pennsylvania is responsible for 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So Pennsylvania representatives to the recent climate talks had the dubious distinction of representing the 1%. We're not talking about a country or region of the globe. We're talking about one relatively small state's contribution to climate disaster. We aren't merely talking about concerns. We're talking about Pennsylvania's responsibility and moral obligation to reduce greenhouse gases. That can only mean keeping them in the ground. Public comments represent the collective stories of the Commonwealth. You can't quantify personal narrative. How do you reduce Maggie Henry's powerful and emotional testimony that left many of us with tears in our eyes to home and livelihood damages? Home and livelihood damages just don't quite match up to losing your family farm of 5 generations, losing a vocation you loved, and getting dumped with a legacy as the generation that sold out. The word attribute, as in damages owners attribute to natural gas drilling, is the wrong word here. Science has proved sufficient evidence that drilling is the cause of contaminated wells and sickened animals and people. How, with any integrity, can you remain an organic farmer when you're surrounded by frac pads, compressor stations venting VOCs, and pipelines leaking methane?
Betsy, could you wrap up, please?
The word choice, frustration, as in frustration with pipeline companies' treatment of landowners and communities, doesn't begin to capture it. Public outrage at the deceit, outright lies, and illegal trespass are a start. The second sentence reads, in general, citizens urge DEP to enforce existing regulations, enact appropriate fines, proactively monitor natural gas extraction, and do away with self-reporting. This is fine, but an exercise in wishful thinking. It reminds me of the young woman who testified at the Copenhagen climate negotiations. You've been negotiating all my life. She was ready for action, and so are we. In short, we ask you to stop acting as the dirty energy protection department and act on your mandate to protect our environment. The last sentence of the paragraph reads, several citizens specifically expressed calls for Governor Wolf to immediately disband the task force for their belief that the composition is heavily weighted with industry representation. It's not just their belief, it's the outcome, the assessment of an independent report provided by the Public Accountability Initiative. Finally, only because my 120 seconds are nearly up, the people's voice is loud and clear. Yes, disband the Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force. Yes, implement smart planning for the Commonwealth, for Pennsylvania's energy future. Yes, hold public meetings across the Commonwealth. After all, as you said, we're talking about massive and unprecedented infrastructure build-out that will affect every county in the Commonwealth. In many states, that would make this a public referendum or a ballot initiative. Thank you.
Next, Abe Amoros, followed by Margaret D. Martellier, followed by Nathan Soy.
Good afternoon. My name is Abe Amoros. I'm a member of the Laborers International Union of North America, also known as LIUNA. For over a century, LIUNA has been a voice for the hardworking men and women of America, ensuring their right to obtain safe, good-paying, family-sustaining jobs. Our Commonwealth is home to more than 25,000 LIUNA members who right now are helping to build our infrastructure projects that are bringing new energy, job creation, economic growth to our state and communities. We play a central role in ensuring pipelines are developed safely and responsibly, and we have a vested interest in how this final report is crafted. That's because these projects are lifelines for our community, helping to build lifelong careers for our members as well. Across the Commonwealth, development of the shale industry has become a new economic engine for our state, supporting energy infrastructure projects that have brought new opportunities to thousands of residents and increased the energy independence of our entire country. Increasingly, new pipeline projects are delivering short-term and long-term benefits from construction and long-term economic benefits from increased access to affordable natural gas and natural gas liquids. I know that many have expressed opposition to this process and specific projects, but no matter what side you're on, the one common thread is safety, and that has been among the chief concerns of this task force, and we commend you for it, to ensure that we develop Pennsylvania's energy resources as safely and efficiently as possible. Because of that, I encourage DEP and the task force to consider all of the impacts any new and additional proposed regulations may have on investments here. I cannot stress enough that for the thousands of workers across the state, these projects are not just pipelines, ladies and gentlemen, but also lifelines to family-supporting jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Margaret D. Martellier, followed by Nathan Soy, followed by Ryan Helms.
Hi. My husband and I are plaintiffs in a lawsuit in Philadelphia against Sunoco for the Mariner 2 pipeline. And so I've had to learn a little about what goes on with this industry. And here's what I've learned. In theory, FERC and the PUC should be out there protecting me and my property from a company that only wants to put pipelines in so it can sell them to foreign countries. And somehow I'm supposed to be okay with that. I'm not okay with that. I have no reason to be okay with that. I don't own stock in Sunoco. I don't work for a government agency so that I'll get my salary just keeping friendly with the oil and gas industry. I just have a backyard that is the reason I bought my property that is going to be trampled upon for no good reason that I see. I agree with a lot of the people who've already spoken. The point of this task force was completely wrong. The first thing I noticed when I read it was, wait a minute, nobody asked if we should be doing this, because nobody did. Nobody even raised the issue. Is this something we should be doing to the citizens of Pennsylvania? I have a T-shirt that I had made for me. On the front, it says, "The people shouldn't be afraid of their government." And on the back, it says, "The government should be afraid of its people." I think you need to hear those words because we're angry. We're angry. We're not, all due respect and all that. Yeah, I'm angry, and I'm not going to put up with it. If I can do anything at all to keep you guys from ruining my yard, I am going to do it. Next time I'll wear the T-shirt so you can see it, but Sunoco has never told the truth, as far as I can tell, in any conversation I or my husband have had with them. There's no good faith in here. There's just no good faith to be had. And unfortunately, I've concluded that there's no good faith on the part of Pennsylvania's government either.
Next, Nathan Soy, followed by Ryan Helms, followed by Rob Baer.
My name's Nate Soy. I work with Clean Water Action. We're one of the largest environmental organizations here in Pennsylvania. It's been my job, it has been my privilege over the past 8 years to facilitate public involvement in the state of Pennsylvania. Task forces such as this, committees of the DEP and DCNR, and regulations promulgated have generated hundreds and thousands and thousands and thousands of comments. And it's been largely my responsibility and the responsibility of other people in this room to bring those comments to bear and to get people to do that. I hate to say this, folks, I have less and less enthusiasm for my work. And I have to say why. It's because ultimately nothing happens with this stuff. Nothing. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. And it is a travesty that we have to parade here before you and beg. It shouldn't be such. What happens when the people finally get tired of begging? What happens when people finally get tired of just coming in and giving their hard-written comment? One more minute. What we're doing here is this is supposed to be civil discourse. When civil discourse is finally closed off or ignored, it leaves only the option for uncivil discourse. And that just may be what is happening now and will happen next. Thank you very much.
Next, Ryan Helms, followed by Rob Baer.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Helms. I'm a business representative in electrical construction industry. I come from Berks County. I also represent many of the building trades, union trades that work here in eastern Pennsylvania. I would just like to say that the Pipeline Task Force is here to ensure that we develop Pennsylvania's energy resources safely and efficiently as possible. We believe that safe development and environmental protection can and will go hand in hand. but it's important that rules adopted for pipeline development do not go above and beyond these required of other infrastructure and development projects. It's important that regulations and surveys are done to ensure that development is safe, but those regulations created cannot be so onerous of pipelines alone that the risk-making projects uneconomic. Unfortunately, a few individuals want to put a stop on the development of Pennsylvania's energy resources. And as a result, they're reacting negatively to task force and the mission of the task force. We believe the task force should not consider these anti-development voices to be speaking for the majority of Pennsylvanians. Developing energy resources is an essential component to keeping Pennsylvania's economy growing. Government data indicates that pipelines are the safest, most environmentally friendly way to transport energy resources. The development of this energy infrastructure is vital to continuing the Pennsylvania energy boom our state has enjoyed, and if the pipelines are not built here, they will likely be built elsewhere, causing Pennsylvania to miss out on the benefits of these infrastructure projects. Pipelines are the safest way to transport energy resources, once again, and we've been safely building pipelines in Pennsylvania for at least 80 years in order to continue the development of our energy resources, and it's essential that we continue building them. Large-scale infrastructure projects like the Mariner East pipelines are job creators for our fellow union members and construction workers. Without these family wage projects, we would not be able to put our training and expertise to use while ensuring we can pay our mortgages, support our families, and continue to put food on our tables. Thanks for your time.
It's not us versus you, we're working class
Listen,
too.
folks, we don't have back and forth with audience
I'm not
members.
catcalling, I'm telling
You
we're
weren't
not against
heckled
you.
when you talked. Please give the same respect to other people.
I'm just telling this
I'm
person that
asking you to please,
We're in the same.
please take it outside if you want to talk to somebody. Everybody gets the same level of respect. Next, Rob Baer.
Robert Baer, Business Manager, IBW 143. Mr. Secretary, Task Force, thank you for your time and effort you are putting in. I don't envy you because this is a very mixed-use panel, and pipelines are a very, very, very hot topic issue. The thing we need to remember in PA, we are going to be, in the next couple of years, in an energy shortage. Now, if you guys would like to put in your report to the governor that you think we should build Unit 3 at 3 Mile Island for a carbon-neutral power plant, by all means, I'd be happy to build it for you. If you'd like to put in your report that you'll agree to take 120 miles of pristine mountaintop and let me put 4,000 windmills up there, I'd be happy to build them for you. If you'd like to take 22,000 acres of pristine Pennsylvania ground, bulldoze it flat, cover it with stone, and have me put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megawatts of solar generation on it at the cost of $2.6 million per megawatt, I'd be happy to do it. I'll put a lot of Pennsylvanians to work. But everything you do is going to be a trade-off. You know that the federal government is pushing for the EP regulations to do away with coal. I have built solar. I have built water. I've done the hydros. I've refueled nuclear reactors. I've built coal burners. I've climbed the 350-foot windmills, and I have done combined cycle natural gas power generation. If you want to keep Pennsylvania in the 21st century, if you want baseload generation, we're going to do it with natural gas. It's that simple. Renewables, to everybody sitting here, I think they're a great idea. I'm in favor of them. But right now, in my lifetime, your children's lifetime, the power usage in the United States and in Pennsylvania, you can't replace the baseload generation we need with renewables cost effectively. Okay? I've been doing this 30 years. It's not doable. Now, you want to do a good trade-off? I know there's people from Sunoco sitting there. I've worked with Sunoco in the past. I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. You want to do something to help everybody out? Put in a report, and I don't think anybody from Sunoco would disagree with it. Increase the fines when they do win and rape the land. Screw your farm up. Ruin your hay crop. If they're a true good corporate citizen, hold them responsible. Make the fines worthwhile. Not $59,000. Hit them with, let's just throw a number out there. $1 million. Not like that. To me, $1 million is a lot. To them, it is too. Hold them accountable. Don't stop the infrastructure. We need it in PA. We need the jobs. You heard the Manufacturing Association talk about the economic impact that the natural gas industry has. Folks, we can argue about it all we want. You can't ignore the fact it is an economic engine for Pennsylvania. We can either be in front of the curve or we can be behind the curve. We can be at the forefront of building an infrastructure that supports Pennsylvania and its citizens, or we can be in the 1920s. Your job, hear everybody, come up with a report for the governor. But please, keep in mind, public safety, environmental safety, economics, and corporate accountability are your 4 biggest charges that this task force should be presenting to the governor. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That is the last individual who has signed up. Is there anyone else who has not spoken but has not signed up that would like to talk? Please step to the podium and identify yourself.
My name is Barbara Van Horn. I am 84 years old, possibly the oldest person in this room, and I have lived and loved Pennsylvania every one of those 84 years. I feel as if, even though I might be the oldest one here, that I'm a lot more modern than some of the people at this table. I think I'm looking at dinosaurs who are living in the last century. I also think I'm looking at foxes that are trying to guard the hen house, except I don't think they're doing a very good job of guarding the hens. I am here on behalf of my great-grandson. His name is Geordie. He's very important to me. He was born in Williamsport, Lycoming County, the heart of the fracking industry, the place where the fracking industry has promised that in 20 years it will be the most fracked county in the United States, possibly in the world. I don't want that future for my great-grandson. And I don't know whether any of you have children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, but do you think about the future for them? Do you think about what's going to happen tomorrow if Lycoming County becomes the most heavily fracked in the United States? I'm a Pennsylvanian. DEP works for me. Your job is to protect my environment and the environment of my great-grandson and everybody else's children and grandchildren. I see the people sitting at this table. Here's FERC. They never met a pipeline they didn't like. They're funded by the pipeline committees, not by the federal government, even though that's what's in their name. I beg you to do your job of protecting the environment of Pennsylvania. Don't ignore Paris and what happened there. Don't ignore the fate of our planet if this is allowed to continue. Stop being dinosaurs and get into the 21st century. And I'd like to read a quote from Prince Charles of England. I urge you to consider the needs of the youngest generation, because none of us has the right to assume that for our today, they should give up their tomorrow.
Okay, anyone else?
I'm Steve Izzo. I live in Brogue, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's hard to sit here. I'm not educated a lot as to exactly what this panel was discussing today. It sounded like a lot of logistics to me. But it's hard to sit here and believe for a second that any of you really have the safety of Pennsylvania citizens in mind. Pursuant to buckets 1 and 5 that seem to be about the safety of citizens, it seems to me it would be a lot better to leave the gas in the ground and not build the pipelines at all. In light of the economic conditions surrounding fossil fuels right now, what possible sense does it make to spend all this money and all this effort, the destruction of environment and possibly the health of people, to go forward with something that isn't even economically viable or may be a dead industry? Can someone please tell me how that makes any sense whatsoever? It doesn't. This is the good old boys club. There are certain people around here that represent folks that are going to make a lot of money off this. This isn't for the benefit of citizens. You guys have to go home at Christmas and talk to your relatives, right? Eat dinner with them. What do you tell them? Are they rich as a result of your investment in these industries, your participation, or do some of them maybe care about the planet and care about the health of people? When you don't know people, it's really easy not to care much about what happens to them. But as soon as you get to know them, your family, your friends, it starts to matter a little bit. I'm not a young man anymore. I'm 58 years old. And I've been around long enough to know BS when I see it. And this whole commission is BS. This is a whitewash. It's not for us. It's for you guys. It's for money. Is money happiness? I hope so, because otherwise you guys are going to be really disappointed when you die alone and old and you've pissed off everybody who probably ever cared about you because you've done this thing that in 20 years, 30 years, it should be next year, is going to be looked back on as a terrible human mistake. I'm upset. I don't have kids, so I can't sit here and claim I'm worried about my kids' future. I just think this country's gone to hell. And I think you guys are some of the people that are help dragging us right there with it. Making your money. I'm happy now. Screw everybody that comes after me. It's disgusting. It's upsetting. There's no morality in this decision or in this process at all that I can see. I don't know how you guys sleep with it. I really don't.
Justin Wasser, 112 Stratford Avenue, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I also am here working with the Sierra Club. But I rise to speak to all of you individually. I respect you. You're here working today. Many of you are representing business interests and other interests, and the vote that you're going to have come January will not be your own. You may have mixed feelings, and I would love to appeal to your conscience, but I think everyone else did a better job. But again, I understand that the vote you're casting is not your own. It's that of your industry, that of your interest. So I don't talk to you today. What I tell you is vote your job, vote your special interest, and do it boldly this time around. Because the people who oppose the industries and special interests that you work for and oppose the harms that some of these industries do greatly outnumber you and are quickly becoming aware of the little schemes that happen here. In fact, I was at a recent industry conference, and they were kind of terrified that the public learned that FERC was a thing. So I speak instead to the public servants. By oath, by election, and by appointment, you represent me. You represent the people behind me, those who have commented, and those who the happenings of this task force are unknown, yet nevertheless will be outraged. And you have elected office of appointment, no, they will be outraged. When pipelines tear through their cities and municipalities, take their land rights away from them, radicalize and threaten the health and quality of life for them and their children. Further, by Article 1, Section 27 that everyone's reminded us of the Pennsylvania Constitution, the future generations are also your responsibility. This is your job, representing me, my interest and the interest of the people here speaking today. That is the special interest that you need to represent. These recommendations considerably lack protections for the environment and public welfare. I humbly stand here today for me, for full disclosure, I'm working as well, but I get the honor and privilege of representing 26,000 people in Pennsylvania, very much like the representatives here in government, and 2 million people nationwide. And I have a specific ask, not just a complaint and a concern, but I ask the elected officials here, I ask the public officials here, I ask my representatives to refuse to submit this proposal to the governor before you, Secretary Quigley, and the governor conduct a thorough and comprehensive environmental, economic, and public health survey of the impacts that a possible 30,000 miles of pipeline over the next decade will cause. And I ask you to sincerely consider that. One of you boldly to bring that up at the next meeting. That this body not move any further, that no proposal be made until all I'm asking for is balance and consideration of our interests. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet that would like to?
I have a statement from someone who was unable to make it. Am I able to read that?
Sure.
Her name is Rachel Mark, and she lives in Hummelstown. At the recent Paris summit, world leaders came to an agreement about carbon limits and are now ready for action to prevent the worst effects of climate disruption. Climate action will mean a steep decrease in carbon emissions from all fossil fuels, including the carbon and methane emissions from natural gas. In 2000, it may have been appropriate to think of natural gas in terms of a bridge fuel. However, it is no longer appropriate in 2015. This should be no surprise if we have heard the warnings of scientists who for years have said that the longer we wait, the steeper the curve of needed reductions will be. We no longer have the time to continue to build infrastructures that locks us into decades of continuing our use of fossil fuels. From undrinkable water to degradation and ruination of wetlands and habitats, from the hazards of methane leaks and pipeline failures to extreme weather events related to climate change, we cannot afford the path we are on. Civil society is already paying the cost in the form of health care, repair of environmental damages, and migration caused by food and water insecurity. We are faced with two paths, one sustainable and one not, and we have a moral decision to choose the right one. You can jail the resistors, but you can't jail the resistance.
Anyone else who has not had an opportunity to speak? Okay. Seeing none, is there anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's important that there be an adequate public statement part. I mean, from my point of view, everything you're hearing today, for those of you who aren't used to this, is exactly what we as senators and representatives and our constituents tell us. And I know Marvin will say the same in terms of what he's hearing in this township. Am I right, Marvin? And so if you put in this report without raising or at least noting the positions of the citizens, then its legitimacy gets questioned. So what I'm suggesting to the panel is that there are a series of decent questions that the public is raising. You can at least list the questions as questions that are worthy of being answered. You even have a way to organize your ways to deal with some of the, we were arguing, do you vote this way or that way, and how do you organize your categories? I mean, for example, I think there needs to be the question is, what is the role of the task force, and how was it put together, and what is its composition? That's a fair question that the public has. There should be an answer. The matter of the Pennsylvania Constitution comes up every hearing I've been at. We know, and a fair way to answer that is how the courts have interpreted it. And the courts have essentially said it's up to the legislature, or it's dealt with as a land use question, not as a constitutional question. People should have the right to understand what the courts have said. I think the courts are wrong. I think there's a huge case now going on in terms of the Clean Air Council and the suit in Philadelphia on the Constitution. You have a whole group from the Widener Center for Environmental Law also involved in all that. Rightfully or wrongfully, whatever people say is a legitimate question. You've been heard the question of regulation and what is regulation? The matter of fines. Doesn't the public have a right to ask the question, and we have we have to note, and who is accountable? How do you make people accountable? Is 59,000 or 62,000 or 10,000 the answer? I mean, these are, what I'm trying to get at, these are all legitimate questions. And if they're not listed, they're not at least put into a context of where they come from, then it takes away from whatever impact the governor wanted to have from this report, because what's being challenged is the very legitimacy and composition of the committee in and of itself. Or let's look at some of the other questions. This matter of safety. Now, you know, my union friends, and I'm a union supporter, do bring up a good issue. What guarantees and how are they going to be built to specifications and to assure that everyone who is building a pipeline is adequately trained? The union argument, which in my judgment is a legitimate argument, is that we can guarantee and show the citizens the training that takes place and actually certify that people have done that. What of this issue that the public has raised, very legitimately, my friends, of the gas is going overseas and Pennsylvanians aren't seeing it in their homes? By the way, that's a key issue in the Senate now, because we personally and the legislature is coming to the conclusion that the people of this state deserve to get some of the benefits from natural gas, deserve to be hooked up. This is not just a global enterprise. It's a fair question, Secretary Quigley, that needs to at least be recognized. Now, whether you do this, let me just go on 1 more minute or 2 minutes here. The matter of eminent domain. That and as our PUC chairman knows, this is a crucial issue. And when we declare things as public utilities, and the citizens have their homes potentially taken away, and when a gas line goes underneath their porch, and the value of their real estate is questioned, they have a right to raise that question, do they not? And they have a right to ask, what is the government? What is the legislature? What is the governor? What is the PUC? How do they feel about this issue? Or you dealt with, for example, I think I support the industry, and I think it's important for economic viability. But the question of oversupply needs to be answered. And the answer in part is oversupply now, but what happens in the future? Or the question of the issue of global warming. Whether we like it or not, and as you know, Mr. Secretary, your previous secretary was almost not here because he refused to address the issue of global warming. And we were part of the crew that put him to the wall because he didn't address that. All I'm trying to say to everyone is that I'm happy you heard this, because I hear it every day in the letters I get. I hear it every day. And in fact, the truth of the matter is that most of us in the legislature hear this. And so that's why I raised the question a while back. Is this report simply for the governor? Or is this report for the public? Is it for the governor and the legislature together? Which is absolutely necessary if you're going to get anything done in this Commonwealth. As you can see, when we don't work together, we're now, 100 and some days in a budget situation. So all I'm saying is this. Accept the reality, accept the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people in this Commonwealth who are pissed off, all right, to put it bluntly, who are angry and who are frustrated. I want to see the natural gas industry work because, you might disagree with me, but I believe in this economic vitality. I want to see those jobs created. But I know damn well, at least in my own county, we have the 3rd highest number of pipelines in the Commonwealth right now, and Chester County. And not one penny of profit will come from the Marcellus Shale unless pipelines are built. But citizens stop them because they want some answers. We can succeed if we at least recognize in whatever we come out with a report that it has to be done safely. There is a potential environmental impact, and the citizens have a right to get some answers. We can have the economic development, we could have the safety, we can protect our environment, and we in this task force need to say it, all right? We need to, so in sum, all I'm saying to you is be fair and just to the public comment. Not a paragraph, but raise every single question. And at least give an answer as to why. Defend the economic viability or oversupply. Explain what's going on. Explain the Constitution, that there's those of us, that there are court cases now on that Constitution, that the courts have only ruled on the land use part of it, and that this is this will end up in the courts in many ways, and the Supreme Court of this country is going to have to, this Commonwealth is going to have to determine it. Because you understand, just 1 second, I'll be done. You understand that the justification when we passed Act 13 was based on Article 27 because it gave us the right as a legislature to determine that we had a right to deal with natural resources and hence determine that the state was zoning and not the local municipalities. That was overruled by the court, but not on the constitutional issue. It was overruled on a zoning and land use issue. So really, Article 27 of the Constitution, Section 1, and remember, that is goes way back. It includes the right to bear arms. It's the oldest fundamental statement of any state. And in 1968, when this was put in, we were the first state in the United States to use the word sustainable. But how it's interpreted, the public should be explained to them. All I'm saying, you want to deal with the anger, you want to deal with the frustration, you want to get those pipelines that are there, that are essential, you want to go through my county? These are the questions that are being asked. And all I'm urging you to do is to be fair in this report and at least have them raised and answer them. There are answers to these questions. And ultimately, what I think this task force needs to say is that we stand for, and the governor should stand for, and the legislature should stand for a way to have the economic viability, but to guarantee a protection of the environment, have regulations that have some teeth, have some respect for the townships, and expect and understand that the zoning question is a fundamental one. And ultimately, I think you can have your cake and eat it too. I think you can have safety, you can have protection of the environment, and you can actually have the economic viability that comes. But I think we have, Mr. Secretary, an absolute responsibility in fairness, to address this question and to give answers to the questions that the public has. So, there. Said what I had to say.
Ken.
So again, Ken Klimo from Wilkes. I'll try not to say anything that I'm going to regret later on as I drive back. I do want to, first of all, thank you. I completely agree with everything that you just said in terms of, the fact that I've been through 3 meetings now where we've heard some, very thoughtful, very heartfelt commentary from people who are really scared to death about the industry, who are very, who are really concerned about, about natural gas development. Certainly, I know also that you're also going around and you're trying to sell President Obama's clean energy plan, and I know that you're encountering resistance, but a whole different kind of resistance. One of the unique things is that I get to teach a course in energy at Wilkes University. I'm head of the Energy Institute there. I'm also a real proponent of alternative energies, but I think I see the big picture, and I really liked what the fellow in the white shirt said. I think that you get it. You really get it. As somebody who has tried to put wind farms up and met with resistance, somebody who, if you saw in the paper recently, there was a solar farm that was denied. And so we have some really big issues that we have to face as it relates to energy. And I think that we all have to realize that we're all in it together. And by demonizing each other and by saying it's all for profit, or just saying, well, you're all evil, I think that you're really missing the point that we really have to come up with solutions that are really viable, realistic solutions. And so So I think then that I would fully agree then that you know, we heard some very good commentary, and I think that it's really important then that you respond, and that we all respond to that commentary that we heard, you know, over the last 3 meetings. So thank you very much.
Anything else from the task force members? We need to wrap up here. We're actually 26 minutes over time. Our next meeting will be January 20th, 2016. So with that, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. We're adjourned.